The worn leather notebook slipped from Michael Reed's trembling fingers as turbulence rocked the Boeing 737. His weathered hands, once steady enough to transcribe ancient texts in 7 languages, betrayed him in that moment of unexpected vulnerability. Across the narrow aisle, Catherine Wells glanced up from her tablet, initially annoyed by the disturbance. But then she heard a gentle voice switching effortlessly from Italian to French, then German, as a father helped his 8-year-old daughter understand why airplanes sometimes shake. Tesoro, he whispered, then repeated in perfect French, ma chérie. The little girl's worried expression melted into wonder as her father continued in Spanish, then Russian, then something Catherine couldn't identify. 7 languages in less than 2 minutes, each phrase carrying the same tender reassurance. Catherine found herself leaning forward, captivated, not just by the linguistic display, but by something deeper. A devotion so pure it seemed to transform the cramped economy cabin into something sacred. What truly caught her attention, however, was what had fallen from the notebook, a yellowed military document with alphanumeric codes in the margins, codes that made her blood run cold. The same codes she'd seen in her father's classified files years ago, the ones connected to Project Nightingale. "Daddy, will you tell me the story about the brave little sparrow again?" Sophie Reed adjusted her small frame in the middle seat her father had managed to secure next to the window. Her pressed nose against the small porthole left a fog circle that she traced with her finger, drawing invisible pictures only she could see. "The clouds look like Mommy's blanket," Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible above the engine's hum. Michael's chest tightened at the innocent observation. Elizabeth's cream-colored throws still lay folded on their living room couch, untouched for 18 months now. He had tried washing it once, desperate to remove the faint scent of her lavender perfume, but had broken down in the laundry room, clutching the fabric against his face. As Michael reached down to retrieve the fallen notebook, his eyes met Catherine's. For a brief moment, something passed between them, recognition perhaps, or warning. He quickly slipped the military document back into his notebook, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Catherine saw the slight movement in his temple, the defensive posture of a man with secrets. Catherine Wells sat 3 rows ahead in first class, her manicured fingers dancing across her tablet screen as quarterly reports demanded her attention. At 42, she commanded a tech empire worth $3.7 billion. Yet something about the gentle murmur of foreign languages behind her kept pulling her focus away from profit margins and market projections. She'd built Wells Technologies from a tiny startup in her garage to a global powerhouse, sacrificing marriage, friendships, and the possibility of children along the way. The divorce papers from Eric had been finalized just 6 months ago. Irreconcilable differences, her lawyer had explained. Though Catherine knew the truth was simpler, she'd chosen corporate success over human connection one too many times. But it wasn't the professor's linguistic abilities that kept her attention. It was those codes, C7NM44A13X, scrawled in faded blue ink on the document that had slipped from his notebook. The same classification codes her father had shown her just before his mysterious death 11 years ago. "Remember Cat," her father had said, using the nickname only he was allowed. "If you ever see these codes again, it means the Nightingale is still alive." The turbulence struck again, more violent this time, and several passengers gasped as their drinks spilled. Sophie's small hand gripped her father's arm, her knuckles white with fear. Michael immediately reached for the worn leather notebook. "Papochka," he began softly, the Russian word rolling naturally from his tongue. "Once upon a time there was a little sparrow who was afraid to fly." His voice carried the slight accent Elizabeth had loved, not quite American, picked up from years of living abroad during his military service, a past he rarely discussed. Sophie's breathing slowed as he continued the story in Italian, then switched to German for the part about the wise old owl. Each transition was as smooth as silk. Catherine found herself holding her breath. She'd heard plenty of polyglots in international business meetings, but this was different. This wasn't about impressing clients or closing deals. This was pure love, translated into whatever language could best comfort a frightened child. She closed her tablet and turned slightly, catching glimpses of the father and daughter through the gap between seats. The man appeared to be in his mid-50s, with prematurely gray temples and hands that spoke of both intellectual and physical labor, rough, calloused, but incredibly gentle as they turned the pages of his notebook. His daughter was a miniature version of someone else, delicate features that must have come from her mother, Michael realized, because they certainly didn't inherit them from his weathered face. The child wore a simple dress that had been carefully mended at the sleeve, and her shoes showed the kind of wear that suggested they were her only pair. When the man shifted to reach for his water bottle, Catherine caught a glimpse of a military tattoo partially hidden beneath his sleeve, not the typical veteran's mark, but something more specific to intelligence operations. Everything about this man was a contradiction, a linguist with a soldier's bearing, a gentle father with vigilant eyes that never stopped scanning the cabin. And then the sparrow realized, Michael continued in Spanish, his voice taking on the warm cadence Elizabeth had used during their honeymoon in Barcelona, that being afraid didn't make her weak. It made her careful, and sometimes careful is exactly what you need to be. He switched to Russian for the next part, then to what sounded like Portuguese, weaving the tale through languages like a master craftsman working with different colored threads. Catherine's phone buzzed with an urgent email from her security chief. The Henderson acquisition had been compromised. Someone had accessed classified server data, and millions of dollars hung in the balance. But she couldn't tear herself away from the quiet drama unfolding behind her. When had she last heard someone speak with such unguarded tenderness? When had anyone ever taken such care with her fears? The notebook's pages were yellowed and soft from countless readings. Some entries were written in elegant handwriting that clearly wasn't Michael's flowing script that spoke of education and refinement. Other notes were scrawled in his heavier hand translations and phonetic spellings that suggested late nights spent learning pronunciations he'd never quite mastered. At the bottom of one page, Catherine caught sight of a child's crayon drawing a family of three stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. "Why did Mommy write in so many different words, Daddy?" Sophie asked, her fear forgotten in the magic of the multilingual tale. Michael's pause lasted just a heartbeat too long. "Because love sounds different in every language, sweetheart. Your mother wanted to make sure you could hear it no matter where life took you." His thumb traced the margin of a page where Elizabeth had written, "For our little global citizen," in fading blue ink. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom announcing their descent into San Francisco. Catherine realized she had accomplished nothing during the 4-hour flight. No emails answered, no deals closed, no strategic plans reviewed. Instead, she'd been transported by a stranger's devotion and a dead woman's journal, and disturbed by the appearance of codes that shouldn't exist anymore. The irony wasn't lost on her that she who commanded respect in 7 different time zones had been mesmerized by a man who commanded love in 7 different languages, a man who might also be connected to her father's last warning. As passengers began gathering their belongings, Catherine noticed Michael carefully returning the notebook to a worn canvas bag. His movements were precise, protective, the way someone handles their most precious possession or most dangerous secret. Sophie chatted excitedly about seeing the Golden Gate Bridge, but her father's eyes held a distant vigilance that hadn't lifted even during the storytelling. Catherine made a sudden decision that would have surprised anyone who knew her reputation for calculated moves. She stood up, smoothed her designer blazer, and walked back toward economy class. The closer she got, the more she noticed details that her privileged perspective had initially missed: the careful way Michael had repacked their few belongings, the generic airport snacks, instead of the premium meal service she'd enjoyed, the fact that neither of them had so much as a carry-on bag beyond that single canvas satchel. "Excuse me," she said, her voice softer than her usual boardroom tone. Michael looked up, surprised to find an impeccably dressed woman addressing him. His right hand instinctively moved closer to the canvas bag, a subtle gesture that Catherine's trained eye didn't miss. "I couldn't help but overhear your stories. Your daughter is very lucky to have such a devoted father." Michael's cheeks flushed slightly. "Thank you, ma'am. She's everything to me." The simple honesty in his voice hit Catherine like a physical force. When was the last time someone had spoken about her with such unguarded love? When was the last time she'd felt like anyone's everything? "Are you visiting San Francisco?" Catherine asked, already knowing she was overstepping social boundaries but unable to stop herself. "Job interview," Michael replied, his hand resting protectively on the canvas bag. "Teaching position at a community college. It's been a difficult few years." The admission seemed to surprise him, as if he hadn't meant to reveal so much to a stranger. Sophie tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, tell the nice lady about Mommy's book." Michael's expression shifted, a shadow crossing his features. "It's not really a book, sweetheart. Just some notes your mother made." His eyes met Catherine's with a warning she couldn't mistake. "Don't ask more." But Catherine was already intrigued by the implications. A man who spoke 7 languages fluently, carrying a notebook with military codes, interviewing for a position at a community college. The pieces didn't quite fit together, and Catherine Wells had built her fortune on recognizing when pieces didn't fit. As they prepared to disembark, Catherine found herself walking behind the father and daughter through the jet bridge. She watched Michael guide Sophie carefully through the crowd, his hand never leaving her shoulder, his eyes constantly scanning for potential dangers or delays. The protective instincts of someone who'd learned that the world could take away everything that mattered without warning, or someone who knew he was being watched. At baggage claim, Catherine realized they weren't waiting for luggage. Everything they owned for this trip fit in that single canvas bag. The realization hit her with unexpected force. This man had scraped together enough money for 2 plane tickets, probably spending savings he couldn't afford chasing a job opportunity that might or might not pan out. Meanwhile, she'd flown first class without a second thought, spending more on a single business lunch than this family probably had for their entire trip. Mr. Catherine approached them again, extending her hand. Reed, Michael Reed, and this is Sophie. Michael's handshake was firm but brief, the greeting of someone unaccustomed to attention from women in $1,000 suits, or someone deliberately maintaining distance. Catherine Wells. She watched for recognition, but Michael's expression remained politely blank. Most people knew her name, her company, her reputation. His lack of awareness was somehow both refreshing and suspicious. I hope your interview goes well, Mr. Reed. San Francisco is lucky to have someone with your talents. As they parted ways in the terminal, Catherine found herself thinking about the notebook, about the military codes, about a love story written in 7 languages. She'd built an empire on recognizing talent, an opportunity on seeing potential where others saw only surface details. Something about Michael Reed and his daughter had triggered every instinct she'd learned to trust in business. But this wasn't business. This was something else entirely, something that had been missing from her carefully constructed life for longer than she cared to admit, and possibly connected to the mystery her father had died protecting. As she slid into the back of her waiting Tesla, Catherine made a decision that would surprise even her closest advisors. She was going to find out more about Michael Reed and his remarkable linguistic abilities. She was going to discover why a man with military intelligence connections was interviewing for entry-level teaching positions. And most importantly, she was going to figure out what those codes meant and why her father's last warning seemed connected to this unassuming professor. The notebook had left more questions than answers, but Catherine Wells had never backed down from a puzzle, especially not one that had managed to capture her attention so completely that she'd forgotten about quarterly reports and acquisition deals for the first time in decades. Something told her that Michael Reed was about to change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But first, she needed to understand the story behind those 7 languages, those military codes, and that worn leather journal. What Catherine didn't know was that she was about to uncover a connection that would shake the very foundations of everything she thought she knew about fate, forgiveness, and the power of words to heal wounds that had festered for far too long. 3 days later, Catherine sat in her corner office on the 42nd floor of the Wells Technologies Tower, staring at a file that had taken her private investigator less than 24 hours to compile. Michael Reed's life story lay spread across her mahogany desk in neat, typewritten pages, and each revelation hit her like a physical blow. Dr. Michael Reed, former professor of comparative linguistics at Georgetown University, published author of 12 academic papers on cross-cultural communication patterns, recipient of the Fulbright Fellowship for Eastern European Studies. But beneath the academic accolades lay something far more interesting. Lieutenant Commander Michael Reed, Naval Intelligence, specialized in cryptolinguistics and field operations in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, decorated twice for actions classified at the highest levels. The golden couple of academia and intelligence work photographed at university galas and international conferences, their combined brilliance promising to change the world. Married to Dr. Elizabeth Chen Reed, molecular biologist, specializing in viral pathogen research for the Department of Defense. Then came the medical records: Elizabeth's diagnosis was stage 4 pancreatic cancer at age 34, the experimental treatments that drained their savings, Michael's leave of absence that became permanent resignation when Elizabeth needed round-the-clock care, the mounting hospital bills that forced them to sell their Georgetown townhouse, their car, her grandmother's wedding ring. The death certificate, dated 18 months ago, followed by bankruptcy proceedings that left Michael with nothing but debt and a 7-year-old daughter who couldn't understand why mommy wasn't coming home. But it was the last page that made Catherine's hands shake, a photocopy of a translation contract dated 12 years ago. The client, Wells Industries, Catherine's father's company before she inherited and expanded it. The project translation of highly classified communications related to Project Nightingale. The translator, Dr. Michael Reed, listed as a military contractor, paid $75,000 for work that required the highest security clearance. Project Nightingale, the secret biodefense initiative that had salvaged Wells Industries' reputation after the accounting scandal that nearly destroyed everything William Wells had built. The classified government contracts had generated enough revenue to keep the company afloat during the worst financial crisis in their history. Catherine had been 28, then fresh out of business school, watching her inheritance crumble until that project somehow turned their fortunes around. She'd never known who worked on those translations. Her father had handled the arrangements himself, insisting on working with the best in the business, but never mentioning names. William Wells had died of a supposed heart attack 2 years later, taking most of his business secrets with him. Catherine had inherited a thriving company built on the foundation of that project's unexpected success, never knowing that a quiet professor named Michael Reed had been the invisible hand that guided their salvation, or that her father's heart attack had come just days after he'd shown her those same codes she'd seen in Michael's notebook. The irony was suffocating. While Michael struggled to pay for his wife's cancer treatments, Catherine had been building her empire on the profits generated by his classified work. While he sold everything he owned to afford experimental therapies, she'd been expanding internationally using the connections established by the projects he'd helped translate and decipher. While he held Elizabeth's hand in hospital rooms, Catherine had been celebrating quarterly growth that stemmed directly from his forgotten contribution and possibly from whatever secret had gotten her father killed. Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ms. Wells, the cybersecurity team is reporting another breach attempt. They're requesting your presence in the security center immediately." Catherine stared at the contract bearing Michael's signature, confident strokes from a man who had no idea his words would fund the success of someone who would later sit in first class while he struggled in economy. Or perhaps he knew exactly who she was and what he was doing on that plane. "Cancel all my meetings," Catherine said quietly, "and have security bring Dr. Michael Reed and his daughter to my office. I believe he's currently at San Francisco City College for an interview." "Besides, Wells, we don't have security authorization to—" "Just do it," Catherine interrupted, her voice hardening with the command that had built her empire. "Tell them it's a matter of national security." And it is. As she waited, Catherine pulled up the secure server data on Project Nightingale. Most of it was still redacted, even with her clearance level, but she could access enough to know that something had gone terribly wrong 12 years ago. Something involving a bioweapon, a breach, and a cover-up that had claimed at least 17 lives. Whatever Michael Reed knew about those codes, he was the key to understanding why her security systems were suddenly being breached, why classified data was being targeted, and perhaps why her father had really died. She just hoped she wasn't too late to stop history from repeating itself. The community college where Michael was interviewing occupied a small campus in the Mission District, its aging buildings a stark contrast to the gleaming towers of downtown San Francisco. Michael sat in a hard plastic chair outside the department chair's office, his canvas bag clutched protectively in his lap, his mind replaying the interview that had just ended, an interview that had gone nowhere. "Your credentials are impressive, Dr. Reed," the department chair had said not unkindly, "but we're looking for someone with more recent classroom experience. Being out of academia for 3 years is considered a significant gap." Michael had nodded, his face betraying nothing of the desperation clawing at his insides. 3 years. 3 years of watching Elizabeth fight and fate, of selling everything they owned to buy her a few more months of whispering stories in 7 languages to Sophie as her mother grew too weak to hold her. 3 years that had transformed him from a respected academic and intelligence officer to a man who couldn't even secure a community college teaching position. The hall clock ticked loudly, each second marking time he didn't have. The custody hearing was scheduled for next month. Elizabeth's parents were petitioning for guardianship of Sophie, arguing that Michael couldn't provide adequate stability or financial security. The court documents painted a picture of a loving father whose grief and financial struggles were being used against him by people who measured parental fitness in bank balances and property deeds. The truth that Michael couldn't share the reason he couldn't return to his more lucrative intelligence work lay in that worn notebook. Elizabeth's last discovery, the evidence she'd gathered before the cancer took her strength, the secret that had gotten her research program shut down and possibly contributed to her rapid decline. The evidence that Michael had sworn to protect for Sophie's sake and for the 17 families who still had no idea what had really happened to their loved ones. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Diaz, their elderly neighbor who watched Sophie when Michael had interviews. "Sophie's fine. Made her lunch. Don't worry." Attached was a photo of his daughter carefully coloring a picture of what appeared to be the Golden Gate Bridge, her small face scrunched in concentration. Michael's chest tightened. Everything he did, every interview, every odd job, every careful move was for her. To keep her safe, to keep her close, to honor the promise he'd made to Elizabeth in those final days. "Whatever happens," Elizabeth had whispered, her once brilliant mind still sharp even as her body failed, "keep Sophie away from the Nightingale. They'll come for the research eventually. They'll come for her." The double doors at the end of the hallway burst open, startling Michael from his thoughts. Two men in dark suits approached with the purposeful stride he recognized immediately the security professional's high-end private sector. His muscles tensed, preparing for the confrontation he'd feared for 18 months. "Dr. Michael Reed?" the taller one asked, though it wasn't really a question. Michael stood slowly, keeping his movements deliberate, non-threatening. "Who's asking?" "Ms. Catherine Wells requests your immediate presence. It's a matter concerning Project Nightingale." The name hit Michael like a physical blow. His fingers tightened around the canvas bag strap, calculating odds, mapping exits, formulating the contingency plan he'd rehearsed countless times. "My daughter is being brought to the Wells Technologies building as we speak. Mrs. Diaz has been informed this is a family emergency." The blood drained from Michael's face. "If anything happens to my daughter, nothing will happen to her, Dr. Reed," the second man said, his tone softening slightly. "Ms. Wells was very clear about that. This is just a conversation." Michael knew better than most that just a conversation about Project Nightingale had ended with 17 dead scientists 12 years ago. But they had Sophie now, which meant he had no choice but to play along. "Lead the way," he said quietly, his mind already shifting into the operational mode he'd abandoned 3 years ago. Whatever game Catherine Wells was playing, she had no idea who she was really dealing with or what lengths a father would go to protect his daughter from the shadows of the Nightingale. The Wells Technologies building rose 47 floors into the San Francisco sky, its glass and steel exterior reflecting clouds that seemed close enough to touch. Michael sat rigidly in the back of the black SUV, his canvas bag clutched to his chest, his mind racing through possible scenarios, each one ending with getting Sophie safely away. Catherine's corner office was larger than Michael and Sophie's entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the bay. But Michael barely noticed the expensive art on the walls, the awards and accolades, the evidence of success beyond anything he'd ever imagined. His eyes fixed immediately on Sophie, who sat on a leather couch in the corner, happily drawing with what appeared to be a brand new set of colored pencils. "Daddy," she looked up, her face brightening. "Ms. Catherine gave me these amazing pencils. They have 24 colors." "Sophie." Michael crossed the room in 3 quick strides, kneeling to check her over. "Are you okay? Did anyone—" "I'm fine, Daddy." She held up her drawing, the Golden Gate Bridge again, this time with what appeared to be a family standing on it. "Ms. Catherine said you two have important grown-up things to talk about and that I could draw whatever I wanted while I waited." Michael turned slowly to face Catherine, who stood near her desk, watching the interaction with an unreadable expression. "Was abducting my daughter really necessary, Ms. Wells?" "Please sit, Dr. Reed." Catherine gestured to a leather chair that probably cost more than Michael made in a month during his substitute teaching days. "I have a proposition that might interest you." Michael perched on the edge of the chair, his canvas bag still clutched protectively in his lap. "Whatever game you're playing, I'm not interested." Catherine smiled, and for the first time since their meeting on the airplane, Michael saw something genuine in her expression. "This isn't a game, Dr. Reed. It's about Project Nightingale, the codes in your notebook, and why my company's most secure servers have been under attack for the past 3 days." Michael's face remained impressively neutral, but Catherine didn't miss the slight whitening of his knuckles as his grip tightened on the bag. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. Catherine slid a folder across the desk, the dossier her investigator had compiled. Lieutenant Commander Reed, or do you prefer Professor? Either way, we both know those codes shouldn't exist anymore. Just like the 17 scientists who died 12 years ago shouldn't have died. Michael's eyes darkened. You're playing with fire, Ms. Wells. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then enlighten me. Catherine leaned forward, her voice intense with conviction. Because something is happening, something connected to my father's death, to your wife's research, to Project Nightingale. And whatever it is, it's happening now. Michael's gaze flickered briefly to Sophie, still happily drawing on the couch, oblivious to the tension crackling between the adults. When he looked back at Catherine, his expression had changed, calculation replacing caution. What exactly do you know about Project Nightingale, Miss Wells? I know it was a biodefense initiative that my father's company contracted for 12 years ago. I know you were the linguist who translated the key research. I know 17 scientists died in what was officially ruled a laboratory accident. Catherine lowered her voice. And I know my father showed me those same codes days before his heart attack, telling me if I ever saw them again, it meant the Nightingale was still alive. For a long moment, Michael was silent, weighing options, measuring risks. Finally, he reached into the canvas bag and removed the worn leather notebook. Your father was right to be concerned, he said quietly. The Nightingale isn't just alive. It's about to fly again. Michael opened the notebook to a page covered in Elizabeth's elegant handwriting, complex formulas, and notations that Catherine couldn't begin to understand. My wife wasn't just a researcher on Project Nightingale. She was the one who discovered what it could really do and what certain people planned to use it for. Which was, Catherine prompted when Michael fell silent. It was supposed to be a defensive countermeasure, a way to neutralize biological weapons. But Elizabeth discovered that with slight modifications, it could become something far more dangerous, a targeted pathogen that could be programmed to attack specific genetic markers. The implications hit Catherine like a physical blow. An ethnic-specific bioweapon. Michael nodded grimly. Elizabeth tried to report it through proper channels. 3 weeks later, 17 scientists were dead, the project was officially terminated, and Elizabeth was diagnosed with an unusually aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. You think she was? Catherine couldn't bring herself to finish the question. I don't know. Michael's voice cracked slightly. But the timeline was convenient for anyone who wanted her research buried. What I do know is that she spent her last months gathering evidence, documenting everything she could remember about the project, and hiding it in plain sight within her linguistic notes to Sophie. Catherine's mind raced, connecting dots, seeing the larger picture emerge. And now someone is after that research again. They're hacking my company's servers because your father made copies of everything, Michael finished. Elizabeth told me he was the only executive who believed her concerns. He promised to keep a secure backup of her findings as insurance. The revelation struck Catherine with stunning clarity. Her father hadn't died of a heart attack. He'd been silenced, just like the scientists, just like Elizabeth possibly had been. And now, 12 years later, someone was coming to finish the job, to retrieve the last pieces of Project Nightingale and unleash something terrifying on the world. Why now? Catherine asked. After all this time, Michael's expression darkened. Because the technology has finally caught up with the theory. 12 years ago, the delivery system was theoretical. Today, with advances in CRISPR gene editing and synthetic biology, it's entirely possible. He glanced at Sophie, still absorbed in her drawing. And because Elizabeth hid the final fail-safe sequence in that notebook, without it, the weapon can't be fully activated. Catherine studied Michael's face, seeing the exhaustion etched in every line, the burden of carrying this secret while protecting his daughter, the courage it had taken to walk away from his career rather than compromise his principles. I have a proposition, Dr. Reed, she said finally. Wells Technologies has the resources to protect both you and Sophie. We have the cybersecurity infrastructure to trace these attacks to their source. And I have a personal stake in stopping whoever killed my father. What exactly are you suggesting? A partnership. You help me understand what they're after and how to stop them. I help you secure Sophie's future, and bring the people responsible for Elizabeth's death to justice. Michael's jaw tightened. And why should I trust you? Your company profited from Project Nightingale. For all I know, you're just trying to acquire the research for yourself. Because I'm not my father, Dr. Reed. I build technologies that connect people, not destroy them. And because Catherine hesitated, unaccustomed to revealing personal motivations. Because I saw the way you love your daughter. I saw what you sacrificed for her. That kind of devotion deserves to be protected, not exploited. The simple honesty in her voice caught Michael off guard. When was the last time someone had seen him? Really seen him not as a failed academic or a widowed father, but as a man of principle who'd given up everything to honor his promise. If I agree, Michael said slowly, I have conditions. Sophie stays with me at all times. No one else sees Elizabeth's research. And when this is over, we disappear, new identities, new lives, completely off the grid. Catherine extended her hand across the desk. Deal. As Michael reached to shake her hand, Sophie's voice interrupted the moment. Daddy? Look, I drew us on the bridge with Ms. Catherine. She held up her completed drawing, 3 figures standing on the Golden Gate Bridge, a tall man with gray at his temples, a small girl with pigtails, and a woman in a business suit, all holding hands. Michael and Catherine exchanged a glance, both struck by the innocent optimism of a child who saw connection where adults saw only complicated alliances. Neither of them knew that Sophie's drawing was strangely prophetic, that the bridge between them would soon become the only thing standing between humanity and a weapon designed to tear it apart at its most fundamental level. It's beautiful, sweetheart, Michael said, his voice gentle despite the storm raging inside him. Why don't you draw something else while Miss Catherine and I finish our grown-up talk? As Sophie returned to her artwork, Michael turned back to Catherine, his expression hardening into the determined focus of the intelligence officer he'd once been. Let's start with your security breach. If they're coming after the servers, they must know something we don't. Catherine nodded, recognizing the shift in Mito from desperate father to strategic operator. I'll have my team prepare a full briefing. In the meantime, I've arranged for secure accommodations for you and Sophie in the residential section of this building. How generous, Michael replied, a hint of irony in his voice. And how convenient for keeping us under observation. Protection, Dr. Reed, not observation. Catherine's phone buzzed with an urgent message. She glanced at it, her expression tightening. It seems our timeline just accelerated. The breach attempts have stopped. That's good, isn't it? Michael asked, though he already knew the answer. Catherine shook her head. No, it means they either got what they wanted or they're changing tactics. Michael finished, the soldier in him already calculating new threats. They're coming in person. As if to punctuate his assessment, the lights in the office flickered momentarily and the building's security alarm began to wail. Michael was on his feet, instantly moving towards Sophie with the practiced efficiency of someone trained for crisis. Daddy? Sophie looked up, her eyes wide with sudden fear. It's okay, sweetheart, Michael soothed, gathering both her and the canvas bag in one swift movement. Remember the sparrow story? Sometimes being afraid just means we need to be careful. He glanced at Catherine, who was already on the phone barking orders to security. Secure the server room, she commanded. Full lockdown protocols. No one in or out without my direct authorization. She turned to Michael, her business facade cracking slightly to reveal genuine concern. We need to move. Now. As Catherine led them toward a private elevator hidden behind a panel in her office wall, Michael couldn't help but wonder if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, trusting the daughter of the man who might have betrayed Elizabeth's research. But one glance at Sophie's frightened face reminded him why he had no choice. The nightingale was stirring, and the song it carried was one of devastation. Michael had sworn on Elizabeth's deathbed that he would keep their daughter safe and prevent her research from being weaponized. Now, in the most unlikely of alliances, his only hope of keeping that promise lay with a woman whose empire had been built on the very project that had destroyed his life. The elevator doors closed, sealing them in together, a brilliant linguist with a soldier's training, a ruthless CEO with a hidden conscience, and a little girl whose innocent drawings of bridges would soon become more symbolic than any of them could imagine. As they descended into the secure heart of Wells Technologies, none of them knew that the real battle was just beginning, or that their unlikely partnership would soon be tested in ways that would reveal the true meaning of loyalty, sacrifice, and redemption. Outside the gleaming tower, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in an impeccable suit stepped out, his cold eyes scanning the building's security measures with professional assessment. He touched the communication device in his ear. "The Reed girl is inside," he said quietly. "Initiate Protocol Nightingale." Behind him, three more vehicles approached, each carrying men whose expressions betrayed no emotion. No hesitation, no mercy. The Nightingale was about to sing its deadly song, and only Michael and Catherine stood in its way. The private elevator descended with barely a whisper, its smooth operation a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding throughout the Wells Technologies building. Michael pressed a Sophie close to his side, his free hand instinctively positioned to reach the combat knife, strapped to his ankle, a habit from his military days he'd never abandoned even during the peaceful years of academia. "Where are we going?" Sophie whispered, her small fingers clutching her father's worn jacket. "Somewhere safe, sweetheart," Michael assured her, though his eyes remained fixed on the descending floor numbers, calculating their position within the building, mapping potential escape routes. Catherine caught the tactical assessment in his gaze. "The sub-level contains a secure bunker designed to withstand both digital and physical attacks," she explained, her voice steady despite the alarms still blaring throughout the building. It was my father's paranoia, or perhaps his foresight. "How many access points?" Michael asked, automatically falling into the clipped speech patterns of his intelligence days. "Two. The elevator we're in and an emergency exit that requires biometric authentication from me or my security chief." Michael nodded, processing the information. "And your security team?" 18 men, former military or federal agents, armed and stationed throughout the building. Catherine's phone buzzed again. She checked it, her expression tightening. "Make that 16. We've lost contact with 2 guards on the north perimeter." The elevator finally reached its destination, sub-level 5, well below the city streets. The doors opened to reveal a short corridor ending in a reinforced steel door with a biometric scanner. Catherine moved forward with purpose, pressing her palm against the scanner while allowing her retina to be mapped by the overhead sensor. "Wells Catherine A, access granted," announced a computerized voice as the heavy door slid open. The bunker beyond was nothing like the sterile panic room Michael had expected. Instead, it was a fully equipped command center with multiple workstations, communication arrays, and a central conference table displaying a holographic projection of the building's security systems. Along one wall ran a small but efficient kitchenette and living area, clearly designed for extended occupancy if necessary. "Daddy, is this where Ms. Catherine lives?" Sophie asked, her eyes wide with wonder at the technologies surrounding them. Despite the tension, Michael felt a smile tug at the corner of his mouth. "No, sweetheart. This is just a special workroom for emergencies." "Like when the sparrow needs to hide from the storm?" Sophie asked, referencing their familiar story. Michael's throat tightened at his daughter's innocent wisdom. "Exactly like that." Catherine was already at the main terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she assessed the situation. "We've got a perimeter breach on the northwest corner, 37th floor. Security feed shows." She paused, her breath catching. 6 men, tactical gear, military precision. Michael moved to her side, studying the security footage. His expression darkened as he recognized the methodical approach of the intruders. "That's not a corporate espionage team. That's a kill squad." Sophie had wandered to the living area, distracted by a shelf containing actual physical books, a rarity in this digital age. Michael glanced at her, ensuring she was out of earshot before continuing in a lower voice. "You need to tell me everything about your father's involvement with Project Nightingale. Not the sanitized version, the truth." Catherine's fingers stilled on the keyboard. For a moment, she seemed to be weighing her options, calculating risks, just as she would a business decision. Finally, she turned to face Michael fully. "My father was dying," she said quietly. "Not from the heart attack that eventually killed him, but from early-onset Alzheimer's. He kept it secret from everyone, the board, our investors, even me, until the final months." This wasn't what Michael had expected. "What does that have to do with Nightingale?" "Everything." Catherine moved to a hidden panel in the wall, pressed her thumb against another scanner, and revealed a small safe. From it, she withdrew an old-fashioned USB drive technology so outdated it was nearly unhackable in today's cloud-based world. Project Nightingale wasn't just about bioweapons defense. Its original purpose was to develop targeted genetic therapies for neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS. Catherine's voice took on a bitter edge. My father funded it, hoping to save himself. But somewhere along the way, the military applications became more valuable than the medical ones. Michael's mind raced, connecting new dots to the picture Elizabeth had painted in her final days. Your father wasn't just a contractor. He was the original sponsor. Catherine nodded. When your wife discovered the project had been weaponized, she came directly to him. He was already experiencing cognitive decline, but he understood enough to be horrified. He made copies of her research, hid them in multiple locations, and created a failsafe that would require both her encryption key and his to access the complete formula. The codes, Michael murmured, understanding dawning. That's what the notebook contains, half of the encryption key. And this drive contains my father's half, Catherine confirmed, holding up the USB. Neither is complete without the other, which is why they need both of us. She glanced towards Sophie, her expression softening. Or rather, both of you. The encryption is biometric, keyed to Elizabeth's DNA, which Sophie shares. The implications hit Michael like a physical blow. Not only was his daughter the key to unlocking the deadly potential of Nightingale, but she had been the target all along. The custody battle, the financial pressure, the sudden interest from Elizabeth's parents after years of distance, it had all been orchestrated to separate Sophie from his protection. We need to move, he said, the soldier in him taking full command now. This bunker won't hold them for long once they realize where we are. We can't just run, Catherine argued. The research is still in the secure server. If they breach it, they won't. Michael pulled the worn notebook from his canvas bag. Elizabeth was smarter than that. The server contains only fragments, deliberate misdirection. The complete formula requires this notebook, the drive, and he hesitated, glancing at Sophie, and something only she can provide. A loud bang echoed from somewhere above them, followed by the muffled sound of gunfire. Catherine's phone lit up with security alerts from multiple floors. They're moving faster than we anticipated, she said, grabbing the emergency go bag stashed beneath the main console, another of her father's paranoid precautions that now seemed prescient. There's a maintenance tunnel that connects to the BART system. We can use it to exit without being detected. Michael nodded, already gathering Sophie and their few belongings. Lead the way. As Catherine initiated the bunker's lockdown sequence, a cascading series of security protocols designed to erase data and seal access points, Michael knelt beside Sophie, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Listen carefully, sweetheart. We need to play a special game now, like hide and seek, but with some important rules. His voice was calm but serious. You need to stay very close to me or Ms. Catherine. No talking unless I say it's okay. And if I tell you to run, you run as fast as you can without looking back. Can you do that for me? Sophie's eyes widened, but she nodded solemnly. At 8 years old, she had already experienced more loss and disruption than most adults. She recognized the gravity in her father's tone, the same tone he'd used when explaining that Mommy wouldn't be coming home from the hospital. Like the brave sparrow, she whispered. Michael's throat constricted. Exactly like the brave sparrow. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, inhaling the clean scent of her hair, a momentary anchor in the storm of danger surrounding them. Then he stood the transition from tender father to hardened soldier, visible in the straightening of his spine, the setting of his jaw. Ready, he confirmed to Catherine, who now held a sleek handgun that had been concealed in the go bag. She caught his raised eyebrow and offered a grim smile. Another of my father's paranoid precautions. Remind me to thank him if we survive this, Michael replied, the dark humor of combat veterans surfacing briefly. Catherine led them through a hidden door at the back of the bunker, revealing a narrow maintenance tunnel lit by emergency LEDs along the floor. The air was cooler here, tinged with the metallic scent of machinery and damp concrete. Sophie's small hand found Michael's, squeezing tightly as they moved forward into the darkness. Behind them, the heavy bunker door sealed with a pneumatic hiss, locking away the last vestiges of safety and certainty. Ahead lay only shadows, danger, and the fragile hope that 3 unlikely allies, a disgraced intelligence officer, a ruthless CEO, and a child carrying the genetic key to potential genocide, might somehow outrun the gathering storm. They had traveled perhaps half a mile through the maintenance tunnel when the first explosion rocked the concrete around them. Dust and small fragments of debris rained down as the tunnel lights flickered ominously. They've breached the bunker, Catherine said, her voice tight with controlled panic. Michael's military training took over completely. He swept Sophie into his arms in one fluid motion and broke into a controlled run, his eyes constantly scanning ahead for threats or obstacles. Catherine matched his pace, her designer heels long abandoned for the practical running shoes from the go bag. "How much farther to the BART connection?" Michael asked between measured breaths. "Quarter mile," Catherine replied. "There's a maintenance hatch that requires—" The second explosion cut off her words, this one close enough to knock them both off balance. Michael curled protectively around Sophie as they stumbled, absorbing the impact with his shoulder against the rough tunnel wall. The pain barely registered through his adrenaline. "They're using the tunnel's acoustic properties to track us," he growled, setting Sophie back on her feet. "Change of plans. We need to create a diversion." Catherine nodded, immediately understanding. She handed him the gun without hesitation. "What do you need?" The simple act of trust, handing over her only weapon to a man she barely knew, wasn't lost on Michael. In another life, and another time, he might have acknowledged it. Instead, he quickly checked the weapon's magazine and action with practiced efficiency. "Your phone. Set it to continuously ping the nearest cell tower, then leave it here. It'll buy us maybe 5 minutes." He turned to Sophie, whose face was pale but remarkably composed. "Remember what I said about running without looking back? That time might come very soon." Sophie nodded her chin, lifting with a determination that painfully reminded Michael of Elizabeth, his brilliant, principled wife who had chosen truth over safety and paid the ultimate price. Catherine removed her phone's protective case, set the device, as Michael instructed, and wedged it into a small crevice in the tunnel wall. "Done. Now we split up," Michael said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "They're expecting us to stay together. You take Sophie through the BART connection. I'll create a diversion, then meet you at—" He paused, suddenly aware of the flaw in his plan. They had no safe rendezvous point, no secure location to regroup. "Golden Lotus Tea House in Chinatown," Catherine supplied without hesitation. "My father's old friend runs it. Ask for the private room under the name William's Daughter. No electronic tracking, no corporate connections." Michael studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, he made the hardest decision a father could make. He handed Sophie to Catherine. "Daddy, no." Sophie clung to his jacket, her earlier composure cracking. "Don't leave me." Michael knelt, bringing himself to eye level with his daughter. "Listen to me, Sophie. This is like when the sparrow had to fly away from her nest during the storm. Remember? Sometimes we have to be apart for a little while to stay safe." "But the sparrow came back," Sophie insisted, tears brimming in her eyes. "And so will I." Michael's voice remained steady, though Catherine could see the muscle working in his jaw, the cost of this promise etched in every line of his face. "Ms. Catherine will protect you until I return. You remember how to say 'be careful' in Russian?" Sophie sniffled. "Bud Ostrogen," she whispered. "That's my girl." Michael pressed one last kiss to her forehead, then stood to face Catherine. The look that passed between them contained volumes, a father entrusting his most precious treasure to a virtual stranger, a woman accepting a responsibility greater than any corporate merger or acquisition. "1 hour," Michael said. "If I'm not there." "You will be," Catherine interrupted, her voice carrying a certainty she couldn't possibly feel. Michael nodded once, then turned and sprinted back toward the direction they had come, the gun held low and ready at his side. Catherine watched him disappear into the dimly lit tunnel, this man who had lost everything yet still fought with the determination of someone with everything to protect. "Come on, Sophie," she said gently, taking the girl's small hand in hers. "Your father is very brave and very smart. He'll find us again, I promise." As they continued toward the BART connection, Catherine felt Sophie's fingers tighten around hers, a silent question, a tentative trust. In that moment, Catherine Wells, who had built an empire on calculated risks and ruthless decisions, made a vow more binding than any corporate contract. She would protect this child with her life, not for strategic advantage or future leverage, but because it was the right thing to do. Behind them, the sound of gunfire echoed through the tunnel, Michael's diversion beginning. Catherine quickened their pace, pulling Sophie close as they hurried toward uncertain safety, leaving behind the carefully constructed world she had built and the man who had single-handedly dismantled her perception of what truly mattered. Michael moved with the fluid precision that had once made him one of naval intelligence's most effective field operatives. The years of academic life had softened his body, but not his instincts. As he positioned himself at a strategic curve in the tunnel, those instincts screamed a warning. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and operating on outdated intelligence about his opponents. But he also possessed the one advantage that had kept him alive through 3 combat tours. He was fighting for something irreplaceable. Not country, not ideology, but the future of his daughter, the living embodiment of his promise to Elizabeth. The footsteps approached, measured, tactical, the movement of professionals. Michael raised Catherine's gun, sighted down the barrel, and waited. The first figure appeared in his peripheral vision, tactical gear, identifying him as the same type of operative visible on the security footage. Michael fired twice, not to kill, but to disable. The first shot struck the man's weapon, rendering it useless. The second hit his tactical vest, the impact knocking him back into his companions and creating momentary chaos in the narrow tunnel. Using the confusion, Michael retreated further down a maintenance side passage, deliberately leaving partial footprints in the dust. The diversion would work only if they followed him instead of continuing toward Catherine and Sophie. He fired once more into the main tunnel, then disappeared deeper into the labyrinth of service corridors. His mind calculated odds as he moved. 6 operatives initially visible on the security feeds, 1 disabled by his gunfire, 5 remaining, likely splitting into search teams. His ammunition, 13 rounds remaining in Catherine's gun, plus the combat knife. His objective, lead them away from the BART connection for at least 15 minutes, giving Catherine time to get Sophie to the surface and lost in the crowds of Chinatown. A bullet ricocheted off the concrete near his head, sending fragments of stone stinging against his cheek. Michael ducked into a recessed utility alcove, controlling his breathing as footsteps approached. 2 sets heavy, purposeful. As the first operative passed his position, Michael struck a swift, brutal movement that ended with the man unconscious but alive. The second operative managed to fire once before Michael disarmed him, the bullet grazing Michael's left arm with a searing line of pain that he compartmentalized and ignored. 4 remaining. Michael appropriated their weapons and communication devices, quickly assessing the tactical channel. The team leader's voice crackled through the spott's earpiece. Primary target has diverted from package. Maintain pursuit of primary teams 2 and 3 converge on package route. Acquisition of both targets required for mission success. Cold dread pooled in Michael's stomach. They weren't following his diversion as planned. They'd split their forces. Some were still pursuing Catherine and Sophie. Moving now with desperate speed, Michael navigated the service tunnels using the stolen communication device to track the team's movements. He had to reach the BART connection before the other operatives, had to warn Catherine, had to protect Sophie. The tunnel began to slope upward, indicating his approach to the transit system. Ahead, he could see the maintenance hatch Catherine had mentioned, a heavy metal door secured with both electronic and mechanical locks. And standing before it, weapons raised and ready, were 2 more operatives. Michael assessed his options with the cold calculation of someone trained to make life-or-death decisions in milliseconds. Direct confrontation, high risk, potentially fatal, but immediate. Stealth approach is slower but higher probability of success. The decision was made for him when his stolen communication device crackled again. Team 3 has visual on package. Female adult and child approaching East Maintenance hatch. Moving to intercept. No time for stealth. Michael emerged from cover, firing, his movements a blur of practiced violence. The first operative went down with a shot to the leg, the second returning fire that echoed deafeningly in the confined space. Michael felt the burn as a bullet grazed his side, but adrenaline pushed the pain aside as he closed the distance and engaged in hand-to-hand combat. The operative was good military trained, possibly special forces, but Michael was fighting for his daughter. The difference was evident in the ferocity of his attack, the calculated risks he took, the punishment he absorbed to create openings. When it ended, Michael stood breathing heavily over 2 incapacitated opponents, blood seeping through his shirt from the bullet graze. He quickly secured the maintenance hatch, his mind already racing ahead to the next obstacle. Catherine and Sophie would have emerged into the BART station by now, possibly already under pursuit by the remaining operatives. As he prepared to follow, Michael noticed something clutched in the hand of one of the downed men, a small device with a glowing blue screen. He pried it loose, examining the display with growing horror. It was a genetic scanner calibrated to detect specific DNA markers, Elizabeth's markers, which Sophie carried in her cells. They weren't just tracking movement or using surveillance. They were hunting his daughter through her genetic signature, like bloodhounds following a scent that could never be washed away or disguised. The revelation struck Michael with devastating clarity. This wasn't just about retrieving research or silencing witnesses. Project Nightingale had evolved into something far more insidious than even Elizabeth had feared. They weren't just weaponizing a pathogen to target specific genetic markers. They were using those same targeting mechanisms to hunt the carriers of those markers. His daughter wasn't just the key to unlocking the formula. She was the prototype for its implementation. With renewed urgency, Michael forced open the maintenance hatch and emerged into the bustling Powell Street BART station. The contrast between the silent, deadly confrontation in the tunnels and the ordinary afternoon crowd of commuters was jarring. People streamed past, oblivious to the blood seeping through his shirt or the desperation in his eyes as he scanned the platform for any sign of Catherine and Sophie. There, a flash of Sophie's purple jacket disappearing up the escalator toward the street level. And behind her, moving with deliberate purpose, through the crowd, a man in nondescript clothing whose hand rested too casually near the concealed weapon beneath his jacket. Michael pushed through the crowd, ignoring the protests and startled exclamations. The pain in his side intensified with each movement, but he forced it down, compartmentalized it as he'd been trained to do. Nothing mattered except reaching Sophie before the operative did. The escalator seemed to move with excruciating slowness as Michael took the steps two at a time, shouldering past annoyed commuters. At the top, he emerged onto Market Street, momentarily disoriented by the bright afternoon sunlight after the dimness of the tunnels. A child's frightened cry cut through the urban cacophony, Sophie's voice coming from the direction of the cable car turnaround. Michael sprinted toward the sound, his heart hammering against his ribs, each beat a desperate prayer. Not Sophie. Not my daughter. Not the last piece of Elizabeth I have left. The scene unfolded before him like a nightmare. Catherine stood with her back against the ticket kiosk, one arm protectively around Sophie, the other raised in warning toward the operative who had them cornered. Around them, oblivious tourists snapped photos of the iconic cable cars, unaware of the life and death drama playing out in their midst. Michael approached from behind, using the crowd as cover. 20 feet. 15. 10. The operative's hand moved toward his concealed weapon. 5 feet. Michael struck with all the precision and force his military training had instilled in him. The operative went down hard, the concealed weapon clattering across the pavement. Sophie screamed, the sound cutting through Michael like a physical pain. "Daddy!" He turned and opening his arms just in time to catch his daughter as she launched herself toward him. The impact sent fresh waves of pain from his injured side, but he hardly noticed as he clutched Sophie close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling her small body tremble against his. "I've got you," he murmured the words, a prayer of gratitude. "I've got you." Catherine approached more cautiously, her eyes widening at the blood now visible on Michael's shirt. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he dismissed, though the growing lightheadedness suggested otherwise. "We need to move. There are more of them, and they have—" He hesitated, unwilling to speak the full horror of his discovery in front of Sophie. Catherine understood immediately. "Let's get to the tea house. My father's friend can help with that," she said, nodding toward his injury. As they hailed a taxi, blending into the stream of tourists and commuters, Michael kept Sophie tucked against his uninjured side, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. The taxi driver, an elderly Chinese man with a perpetual smile, seemed delighted by Sophie's shy attempt to thank him in Mandarin, another of the languages Elizabeth had begun teaching her. "Your daughter very smart," the driver commented approvingly. "Learned many language young, very good." "Yes," Michael agreed, his throat tight with emotions he couldn't afford to release. "Her mother's influence." The driver navigated the busy streets with the confidence of someone who had spent decades memorizing every alley and shortcut. As they approached Chinatown, the urban landscape transformed. Colorful lanterns strung across narrow streets, the aroma of spices and incense wafting through open shop doors, vendors calling out to passers-by in a melodic blend of Cantonese and English. "Golden Lotus," the driver announced, pulling up before a modest storefront with red lacquered columns flanking the entrance. The sign above featured elegant Chinese calligraphy alongside the English translation. Catherine paid the fare with cash from the go bag, adding a generous tip that earned them another beaming smile from the driver. As they exited the taxi, Michael noticed how she deliberately kept her body between Sophie and the street, a protective gesture that spoke volumes about how quickly she'd adapted to her role as guardian. The tea house interior was dim and fragrant tables arranged to maximize both seating capacity and the subtle luxury of space in a crowded city. An elderly Chinese woman approached her spine straight, despite her advanced years, her assessing gaze taking in Catherine's disheveled appearance and Michael's barely concealed injury. William's daughter, Catherine said quietly. The woman's expression remained impassive, but she nodded once and gestured for them to follow. She led them through the main dining area to a beaded curtain at the back, beyond which lay a private room with a single round table and a small shrine in the corner, incense burning in a brass holder. "Wait," the woman instructed, then disappeared through another door at the rear of the room. Michael eased himself into one of the chairs, the adrenaline finally wearing off enough for the pain to make itself fully known. Sophie climbed into his lap, her small hands patting his cheeks as if to reassure herself he was really there. "You came back," she whispered, "like the sparrow." "I promised, didn't I?" Michael managed a smile despite the fire burning along his side. A Reed always keeps his promises. Catherine observed their reunion with an expression Michael couldn't quite decipher, something between envy and admiration tinged with the sadness of someone witnessing a connection they had never experienced themselves. The beaded curtain parted again to admit an elderly Chinese man, his face deeply lined with age, but his eyes sharp and assessing. Behind him came the woman who had greeted them, now carrying a tray with a teapot, cups, and what appeared to be a first aid kit. "Catherine Wells," the man said, his voice carrying the hint of an accent polished by decades in America. "You look like your father when he was worried." He turned his attention to Michael and Sophie. "And you must be the reason for her worry." "Uncle Chen," Catherine began the familiar address, surprising Michael. "This is Dr. Michael Reed and his daughter Sophie. They need sanctuary and Michael needs medical attention." Chen nodded, gesturing for the woman to set down the tray. "Lynn will help with your injury, Dr. Reed. I suggest the child wait in the next room. There are books and a small television." Michael hesitated, reluctant to let Sophie out of his sight after coming so close to losing her. Catherine seemed to understand his concern. "I'll stay with her," she offered. "We'll keep the door open so you can see us the entire time." After a moment's consideration, Michael nodded. "Sophie, go with Miss Catherine for a little while. I need to talk to Mr. Chen about grown-up things." Sophie studied his face with the uncanny perceptiveness children sometimes possess. "Is it about Mommy's special book?" The innocent question landed like a physical blow. "Yes, sweetheart. It's about Mommy's work and how to keep it safe like she wanted." Sophie nodded solemnly, then reached into the pocket of her purple jacket and withdrew a small object that made Michael's breath catch: Elizabeth's USB drive, the one she had worn as a necklace during her final months. "Mommy said to keep it with me always," Sophie explained. "She said it was a special key for a special door, and only I could use it." Michael exchanged a stunned glance with Catherine. All this time, while they had been protecting fragments and codes, Sophie had been carrying a critical piece of the Nightingale puzzle against her heart. "That's right," Michael said, carefully taking the drive and tucking it securely into his pocket. "And you've done an amazing job keeping it safe. Now go with Ms. Catherine while I get my owie fixed." Once Sophie and Catherine had moved to the adjoining room visible through the open doorway, but out of earshot, Chen gestured for Lynn to begin treating Michael's wound. "William told me about Project Nightingale before he died," Chen said without preamble, as Lynn carefully cut away Michael's bloodied shirt. "He feared it would be his legacy instead of his daughter." Michael winced as Lynn cleaned the bullet graze with an antiseptic that burned like liquid fire. "What exactly did he tell you?" "That he had helped create a monster and that his only hope for redemption lay in ensuring it never escaped its cage." Chen poured tea into 3 cups with practiced precision. "He also said that if Catherine ever came here with a stranger in need of help, I should give her this." From within his traditional high-collared jacket, Chen withdrew a small leather pouch weathered and cracked with age. He placed it on the table between them, the soft leather making barely a sound against the polished wood. "What is it?" Michael asked, his voice tight, as Lynn began stitching his wound with quick, practiced movements. "I do not know," Chen admitted. "William said it was a key to understanding the true purpose of Nightingale, and that only someone who had seen both the darkness and the light of the project would recognize its significance." As Lynn finished bandaging his side, Michael reached for the pouch, his fingers tracing the worn leather before carefully opening it. Inside lay a single data card of a type he hadn't seen in years. Military grade used primarily for secure communications and field operations during his early intelligence career. "I'll need a specialized reader for this," he said carefully, returning the card to its pouch. Chen nodded. William anticipated this. "There is a secure room beneath this building, accessible only through my private quarters. It contains communication equipment that has never been connected to any network." Michael's estimation of William Wells rose considerably. The man had been playing a deeper game than anyone had realized, carefully positioning fail-safes and contingencies years in advance. "Why, Michael asked. Why go to such lengths? What did he know that was worth all this? Chen's expression grew somber. William believed that Project Nightingale had been corrupted from within its original purpose, perverted by individuals with a vision of humanity's future that required certain genetic lines to be eliminated. The implication sent ice through Michael's veins, confirming his worst fears about the genetic scanner he'd discovered. Eugenics. Of the most sophisticated kind, Chen agreed. Not the crude racial theories of the past, but something far more insidious, targeted genetic pruning to shape human evolution according to someone's specific vision. Lin finished her ministrations and stepped back, saying something to Chen in rapid Cantonese. He nodded and replied, their brief exchange ending with her departure through the rear door. Lin has prepared rooms for you upstairs, Chen explained. You should rest while I make arrangements to access the secure facility. Michael glanced toward the adjoining room where Catherine sat reading a book to Sophie. Her normally commanding voice softened to match the story's gentle rhythm. The scene was so incongruous with the ruthless CEO image that Michael had to remind himself this was the same woman who had built a tech empire on the ashes of her father's mistakes. Can we trust her? Michael asked quietly. Completely. Chen followed his gaze, his weathered face softening slightly. Catherine was 12 when her mother died. William brought her here every Sunday afterward, without fail, even during the worst crises of his company. He taught her to respect tradition while embracing innovation. He turned back to Michael, his eyes reflecting decades of carefully observed human nature. She is her father's daughter, capable of ruthlessness when necessary, but governed by principles stronger than profit. Michael absorbed this assessment, weighing it against his own observations. Catherine Wells was indeed a contradiction, the corporate shark who had willingly placed herself between his daughter and Danger, the billionaire who had abandoned her empire to honor her father's hidden legacy. There's something else you should know, Chen added, his voice dropping further. The men pursuing you, they are not just mercenaries or corporate security. They belong to an organization called the Demiurge. The name sent a jolt of recognition through Michael. During his intelligence career, the Demiurge had been little more than a rumor, a shadowy organization allegedly comprising scientists, military leaders, and corporate powers united by a shared vision of guided human evolution. I thought they were a conspiracy theory, Michael said, remembering the dismissive briefings from his superiors whenever analysts raised concerns about the group's possible existence. Most effective conspiracies maintain that appearance. Chen replied with the faintest hint of a smile. The Demiurge has existed for generations. Its membership secret, its influence vast. William discovered their involvement in Project Nightingale too late to stop them completely, but early enough to create insurance against their plans. Michael's mind raced, connecting Elizabeth's research with this new information. That's why she encoded the fail-safe sequence in our daughter's DNA, he realized. Not just as a security measure, but as living proof of what the Demiurge intended to erase. Chen nodded solemnly. Your wife understood that certain genetic markers the Demiurge wished to eliminate were carried in her family line. By ensuring those markers were documented and preserved in your daughter, she created both the key to their plans and the evidence of their intentions. The full weight of the situation crashed down on Michael. Sophie wasn't just being hunted because she could unlock Elizabeth's research. She was being hunted because her very existence contradicted the Demiurge's vision of humanity's genetic future. His daughter was both key and evidence, both target and testimony. A movement in the doorway drew his attention. Catherine stood there, her expression indicating she had heard enough to understand the gravity of their situation. Sophie's fallen asleep, she said quietly. She was exhausted after everything. Michael nodded unsurprised. Sophie had always responded to stress by seeking refuge in sleep, a trait Elizabeth had theorized came from the same genes that governed her exceptional linguistic abilities, the brain processing emotional overload through unconsciousness. We should let her rest while we examine what's on that data card. Catherine continued, moving to join them at the table. Uncle Chen is the secure room ready. Lynn is preparing it now, Chen confirmed. But perhaps Dr. Reed should also rest before we proceed. His injury? I'm fine, Michael interrupted, already pushing himself to his feet despite the protest from his wounded side. Every minute we delay gives the demiurge more time to regroup and track us. Catherine studied him with an appraising gaze that reminded him uncomfortably of Elizabeth's when she knew he was downplaying an injury or illness. You're pale, your breathing is shallow, and you've lost enough blood to soak through Lynn's bandages already, she observed clinically. You need at least an hour to stabilize before we continue. Michael opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again as the room tilted slightly around him. Perhaps she had a point. 1 hour, he conceded reluctantly. But Sophie stays with me, and we maintain a watch rotation. Catherine nodded, seemingly unsurprised by his tactical approach to rest. I'll take first watch. Uncle Chen has security throughout the building, but I've learned never to rely completely on someone else's systems. The simple statement, an echo of Michael's own philosophy developed through hard experience, created an unexpected moment of connection between them. For the first time since their paths had crossed, Michael felt they might actually be on the same side, not just temporarily aligned by circumstance. As Chen led them upstairs to the private apartments above the tea house, Michael found himself reassessing Catherine Wells. She moved with the awareness of someone trained to observe threats, constantly positioned herself with clear sight lines to all entry points, and maintained the perfect balance between vigilance and appearing relaxed skills that went far beyond standard executive protection training. The apartment was small but meticulously maintained, with traditional Chinese furnishings complemented by subtle modern comforts. Sophie had been placed on a daybed near the window, a light blanket drawn over her sleeping form. Michael immediately checked the window, secured with a clear drop to an alley below that could serve as an emergency exit if necessary. I already mapped potential escape routes, Catherine said quietly, noting his assessment. There are 3 viable exits from this room, 5 miles from the building overall. Michael turned to her, his curiosity finally overcoming his caution. You are not just a CEO, are you? A shadow passed across Catherine's face, quickly controlled, but not before Michael caught it, the same expression he'd seen in the mirror countless times when his past resurfaced unexpectedly. Before I took over my father's company, I spent 5 years with a private intelligence firm that contracted with various government agencies, she admitted. My father insisted I understand the world I would be operating in, including its shadows. The revelation explained much about her competence during their escape, her tactical awareness, her calm under pressure. It also raised new questions about her involvement with Project Nightingale and the Demiurge. Did you know, Michael asked the question, hanging between them, loaded with implication, about what your father was involved in, about what happened to the scientist, to Elizabeth? Catherine met his gaze directly, unflinching. No, my father kept me away from Nightingale completely. I knew it existed as a project, but believed it was purely medical research. It wasn't until after his death that I began finding discrepancies in the company records, research funding, that couldn't be accounted for, security protocols that seemed excessive for standard operations. She moved to the window, looking out at the Chinatown street below, with its lanterns swaying in the early evening breeze. I've spent the last 10 years building Wells Technologies into something that could outshine its origins, never realizing I was building on a foundation of lies. Her voice carried a bitterness that seemed to surprise even her. Everything I've achieved, every innovation we've created, all of it potentially tainted by whatever my father helped set in motion. Michael watched her silhouette against the fading daylight, recognizing the weight of inherited responsibility that bent her shoulders. He had carried a similar burden since Elizabeth's death, the obligation to complete what she had started, to ensure her sacrifice meant something, to protect the truth she had died to preserve. Elizabeth believed your father was trying to make amends. He offered, unsure why he felt compelled to provide this comfort. She told me he was the only executive who believed her concerns, who helped her secure the evidence against those who had weaponized her research. Catherine turned back toward him, her expression vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. Did she suffer? At the end, the unexpected question caught Michael off guard, piercing the defensive barriers he'd maintained since their first encounter. For a moment, he was back in that sterile hospital room, holding Elizabeth's hand as she struggled to complete her final instructions, her brilliant mind fighting to overcome her failing body. Yes, he answered honestly, his voice rough with memory. But not in the way you might think. The physical pain, they managed that with medication. What made her suffer was knowing she wouldn't see Sophie grow up, wouldn't be there to protect her from what was coming. He moved to sit beside his sleeping daughter, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. Elizabeth's last coherent words were about Sophie. She made me promise to keep her safe, to ensure she understood all the languages Elizabeth had begun teaching her, and to never let her forget that she was loved in every tongue her mother knew. The simple truth hung in the air between them, more powerful than any classified research or secret conspiracy, a mother's love transcending death, embedded in languages and stories and genetic code passed to a daughter who would carry it forward. Catherine approached the daybed slowly, as if unsure of her welcome in this intimate moment. I barely remember my mother, she admitted softly. She died when I was young, like Sophie. All I have are fragments, the scent of her perfume, the sound of her laugh, the way she always cut the crust off my sandwiches. She glanced down at Sophie's peaceful face. Your daughter is lucky to have those stories, those languages, that connection. She's lucky to have her father, came Chen's voice from the doorway, where he stood watching them with the quiet wisdom of someone who had observed human nature for decades. And now perhaps she is lucky to have allies willing to protect what her mother valued. Michael's gaze met Catherine's, a silent communication passing between them, acknowledgement of a shared purpose that transcended their initial suspicion and reluctance. Whatever lay ahead, whatever the data card revealed about Project Nightingale and the Demiurge, they were now bound by something stronger than circumstance, the protection of a child who carried both the key to a terrible weapon and the hope for its prevention. The secure room is prepared. Chen continued, his practical tone breaking the moment of connection. When you are ready, you will see what William left behind. As Catherine moved toward the door to confer with Chen about security arrangements, Michael remained beside Sophie, his hand resting lightly on her small shoulder. In sleep, her face relaxed into an expression so like Elizabeth's that it made his chest ache with remembered love and fresh determination. Whatever it took, whatever sacrifice required, he would keep his promise. Sophie would live to carry forward her mother's legacy, not the weaponized perversion of her research, but the true gift Elizabeth had valued above all, the ability to speak love in every language, to bridge differences through understanding, to preserve the beautiful diversity the Demiurge sought to eradicate. The hour of rest Catherine had insisted upon passed quickly. Michael used the time to clean himself more thoroughly, change the bloodied bandages, and consume the simple but nourishing meal Lynn had prepared. By the time Chen returned to escort them to the secure room, Michael felt steadier, the lightheadedness from blood loss receding to manageable levels. Sophie remained asleep, exhaustion keeping her under, despite the movement around her. After a brief discussion, they decided to let her continue resting under Lynn's watchful eye, with Catherine's go bag containing emergency supplies positioned near the daybed for quick access if needed. Chen led them through a concealed door behind a traditional folding screen, revealing a narrow staircase that descended deep beneath the tea house. The air grew cooler as they descended, carrying the scent of earth and concrete. My grandfather built this room during a World War, Chen explained as they reached a heavy metal door at the bottom of the stairs. He was part of a network that helped Jewish refugees escape Europe. The room served as both safe house and communication center. He pressed his palm against what appeared to be a traditional Chinese blessing written on a wooden panel beside the door. The characters glowed briefly, revealing a sophisticated biometric scanner disguised as ancient art. William helped modernize the security, Chen added with a faint smile as the heavy door swung open. The room beyond was a stark contrast to the traditional tea house above a windowless chamber lined with cutting-edge technology, much of it appearing military-grade. Computer terminals with secure air-gapped systems occupied one wall, while communication equipment filled another. A conference table dominated the center of the room, its surface embedded with touchscreen displays currently showing the building's security feeds. Your father was paranoid even by intelligence standards, Michael observed as he surveyed the room's capabilities. William believed that true security came from preparing for betrayal, Chen said, moving to a specialized terminal in the corner. This system should be able to read the data card. Michael removed the leather pouch from his pocket and carefully extracted the military-grade card. As he handed it to Chen, their fingers briefly touched a moment of human connection in this underground fortress of technology and secrets. Chen inserted the card into a reader that looked at least a decade old, matching the technology era of the card itself. The system hummed to life security protocols flashing across the screen as multiple layers of encryption were processed and cleared. Catherine moved to stand beside Michael close enough that he could detect the faint scent of jasmine from her hair, an incongruously delicate fragrance for a woman of such formidable presence. Neither spoke as the system worked. The only sound in the room, the soft whirring of cooling fans and the distant muffled noise of the tea house above. Finally, the screen cleared to reveal a video file dated just 1 week before William Wells's death. Chen stepped back, gesturing for Catherine to take his place at the terminal. "I believe this message is for you," he said gently. Catherine hesitated, her composed expression faltering briefly. Then, with a decisive movement that had built her empire, she stepped forward and activated the video. William Wells's face filled the screen, a man in his early 60s and handsome, despite the evident illness that had hollowed his cheeks and dimmed his eyes. He sat in what appeared to be this very room, the same equipment visible behind him. "Catherine," he began, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested. "If you're watching this, then two things have happened. I'm dead and you've encountered someone connected to Project Nightingale. I hope to God it's Dr. Elizabeth Chen Reed or her husband, because if it's anyone else, you may already be in grave danger." Michael felt Catherine stiffen beside him at the mention of Elizabeth's name. On screen, William continued, his gaze direct and unflinching. "There are things I never told you about Wells Industries' government contracts, about the research we funded, about the decisions I made that can never be undone. I told myself it was to protect you, but the truth is more selfish. I couldn't bear for you to know what I'd done." William paused, taking a labored breath before continuing. "Project Nightingale began as medical research, a targeted genetic therapy that could cure neurodegenerative diseases by identifying and repairing specific genetic markers. You know, I was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. What you don't know is how desperate I was to find a cure, how willing I was to fund research that crossed ethical boundaries." Catherine's hands clenched at her sides, her knuckles whitening with tension as her father's confession unfolded. "We made breakthrough after breakthrough. Dr. Elizabeth Chen was our most brilliant researcher, her work on genetic markers revolutionary. But somewhere along the way, certain military interests recognized that what could heal specific genetic patterns could also harm them. What began as a cure became a weapon, a targeted pathogen that could be programmed to attack specific genetic markers." William's expression hardened, determination temporarily overcoming his physical weakness. "When Elizabeth discovered what was happening, she came to me directly. By then, my cognitive decline had progressed to the point where I was only occasionally lucid, but she caught me on a good day. What she revealed horrified me. A shadow organization called the Demiurge had infiltrated the project, redirecting it towards their vision of guided human evolution through targeted elimination of undesirable genetic lines." Michael's suspicions were confirmed with each word. Beside him, Catherine had gone completely still, her breathing shallow as she absorbed her father's confession. "Together, Elizabeth and I created a failsafe. She encoded critical portions of the research with biometric keys that only she could access, while I secured the targeting protocols and distributed them across multiple secure locations. We believed we had contained the threat." William's face reflected bitter regret. "We were wrong." He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes suddenly sharp with urgency. 3 days after we implemented the failsafe, 17 scientists connected to the project died in what was officially ruled a laboratory accident. Elizabeth survived only because she was on maternity leave with her daughter. I survived because no one realized I was lucid enough to have helped her." Michael's throat tightened as the timeline aligned with everything Elizabeth had told him in fragmented conversations during her illness. The guilt she had carried for her colleagues' deaths, the fear that had followed her even into the cancer ward. "The Demiurge believes they need both Elizabeth's research and my targeting protocols to complete the weapon. What they don't know is that we built in a third component, a genetic key embedded in Elizabeth's daughter, Sophie. Without her, the weapon cannot be fully activated." Catherine turned to Michael, horror dawning in her eyes as she finally understood the full reason for the pursuit. They don't just want Sophie to unlock the research, she whispered. They need her genetic material to complete the weapon itself. On-screen, William continued, seemingly anticipating their realization. If you're watching this with Dr. Reed or her husband, tell them that Sophie isn't just the key, she's the antidote. Elizabeth encoded a self-destruct sequence in her daughter's DNA, a genetic pattern that once mapped will neutralize the weapon permanently. His expression softened briefly. It was her final act of scientific brilliance, using the very diversity the demiurge sought to eliminate as the means to protect it. William's image flickered slightly as he shifted position, pain evident in his movements, despite his attempt to hide it. There's a final component hidden where only you would think to look, Catherine. Remember the story I told you about the mockingbird and the sparrow? The answer is there. He managed a sad smile. I wish I could have been a better father to you, a better man for the world. All I can offer now is the chance to right my wrongs. The video ended abruptly, William's face freezing in that final expression of regret and hope before the screen went dark. Silence filled the secure room, broken only by the soft hum of equipment and the barely audible sound of Catherine's carefully controlled breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, despite the emotional impact of her father's confession. The mockingbird and the sparrow, she repeated softly. It was a bedtime story he told me after my mother died. I'd forgotten it until now. Michael turned to her, recognition dawning. The brave little sparrow, that's the story I tell Sophie. Elizabeth started it when she was pregnant, and I continued after. He couldn't finish the sentence, the parallel between their situations suddenly painfully clear. In my father's version, the mockingbird taught the sparrow different songs to help her find her way home. Catherine said, her voice distant with memory. Each song was for a different kind of danger. One for storms, one for hawks, one for getting lost. Michael nodded slowly, understanding, coming together like puzzle pieces. Elizabeth encoded her research in different languages, not just for security, but as a map. Each language contains part of the formula, and each is activated by specific emotional states or situations. Like a genetic lockbox with multiple keys. Catherine agreed, her analytical mind grasping the elegant solution. But where would my father have hidden his part of the equation? Chen, who had remained silent during William's confession, stepped forward. Perhaps in the place where the mockingbird taught the sparrow, he suggested. Where did this story take place in your father's telling? Catherine's brow furrowed as she searched decades-old memories. In a silver forest beside a golden lake. It wasn't a real place, just a fairy tale setting. Or perhaps not, Chen countered thoughtfully. William maintained a property in the Sierra Nevada mountains beside a small lake that reflects the sunset like gold. He called it his thinking place and visited whenever he needed clarity. Hope sparked in Catherine's eyes. Silver Creek Cabin? I haven't been there since I was a teenager. She turned to Michael, newfound purpose, straightening her spine. That's where we'll find the final component, the targeting protocols that will let us dismantle the weapon completely. Michael weighed their options with the strategic assessment that had once been his professional hallmark. It's remote defensible, and the last place the demiurge would look for us initially. But if they've been monitoring your father's assets? They haven't, Catherine interrupted with certainty. Silver Creek isn't listed among my father's properties. He purchased it under a different name through a shell corporation that doesn't connect to Wells Industries. It was his personal sanctuary, not a corporate asset. The plan formed rapidly between them, each contributing their expertise to its formation. Catherine's knowledge of her father's methods, Michael's tactical experience, Chen's understanding of the demiurge's reach. We'll need transportation that can't be tracked, Michael said, mentally inventorying requirements. Supplies for at least a week, medical equipment in case my wound reopens, and weapons. I can provide all of that, Chen assured him. William left resources here for exactly this scenario. Catherine nodded, already moving toward the communication console. I need to create a diversion, something to draw the demiurge's attention away from our actual destination. If I can make them believe we're fleeing to my company's research facility in Seattle? No. Michael's voice cut through her planning, sharp with sudden alarm. No digital communication, nothing that leaves an electronic trail. From this moment forward, we operate completely off the grid. Catherine bristled, slightly unused to being contradicted so directly. My security systems are the best in the industry. I can create a false trail that would... The demiurge has resources beyond anything you've encountered. Michael interrupted his tone, leaving no room for argument. They penetrated naval intelligence firewalls 12 years ago to access Project Nightingale. They tracked us through maintenance tunnels using genetic scanners tuned to my daughter's DNA. We cannot risk any digital footprint, no matter how secure you believe your systems to be. Their gazes locked in silent confrontation, Catherine's confidence in her technological fortress against Michael's hard-earned paranoia. For a tense moment, it seemed neither would yield. Then, unexpectedly, Catherine nodded. You're right, she conceded, surprising both Michael and herself with the admission. We do this completely analog. No phones, no credit cards, no electronic signatures of any kind. The simple acknowledgement of his expertise, the willingness to defer to his experience, despite her own considerable resources, shifted something fundamental in their dynamic. For the first time, Michael saw Catherine not as William Wells's daughter or a corporate CEO, but as a true ally in the protection of Sophie and Elizabeth's legacy. We'll leave before dawn, he decided, automatically taking command of the tactical planning. Travel only on secondary roads, avoid surveillance cameras, maintain cover identities. If the Sierra property is as remote as you say, we should be able to reach it without detection. Catherine accepted his leadership in this domain without question, focusing instead on what she could contribute. I know the cabin's layout, security systems, and surroundings. Once there, I can locate whatever my father hid. Chen watched their exchange with quiet approval, seeing the alliance forming between these unlikely partners, bound not by trust, not yet, but by shared purpose and complementary skills. I will prepare what you need, he said, simply moving toward the door. Rest while you can. Dawn comes early, and the road ahead is long. As Chen departed, Michael and Catherine were left alone in the secure room, surrounded by the technology that had both created their predicament and might help solve it. The silence between them was no longer hostile or suspicious, but thoughtful, each assessing the other with new understanding. Why are you really doing this? Michael asked finally, the question that had lingered since their first encounter on the airplane. You could have walked away at any point, handed us over to the authorities, claimed ignorance of your father's involvement, protected your company and your position. Catherine considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. When she answered, her voice carried none of her usual corporate authority, only the simple honesty of a daughter who had never known her father as well as she thought. Because I built my entire life on the belief that innovation should improve humanity, not select which parts of it survive. She met his gaze directly, her vulnerability more compelling than any show of strength. And because I saw how you loved Sophie, how you translated that love into 7 languages to comfort her during turbulence, I want to believe that kind of devotion is worth protecting, even at the cost of everything I've built. The raw truth in her answer resonated with something deep in Michael's chest, the part of him that had survived loss and betrayal, without surrendering to bitterness, the part that still believed in the principles that had once guided his service to country and family. Elizabeth would have liked you, he said quietly, the words emerging before he could consider their implications. She always said the measure of a person wasn't their intelligence or their accomplishments, but their willingness to sacrifice for something greater than themselves. Catherine's expression softened the compliment, clearly meaning more to her than any corporate accolade. I wish I could have known her. So do I, Michael replied, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. So does Sophie. A gentle knock at the door interrupted the moment of connection. Lynn stood in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes conveying urgency. The child is awake, she said simply. She is asking for her father. Michael moved immediately toward the door, his protective instincts overriding everything else. Catherine followed a step behind, already calculating their next moves, the path to Silver Creek, the resources they would need. As they ascended the stairs back to the world above, neither spoke of the understanding that had formed between them in that secure room beneath Chinatown. There was no need. Like the languages Michael had learned for Elizabeth and taught to Sophie, some connections required no translation to be perfectly understood. The mockingbird and the sparrow would find their way to the silver forest and golden lake together, each bringing their unique songs to create a harmony that might yet save what the demiurge sought to destroy. Behind them, William Wells's frozen image on the screen watched their departure, a father's final attempt at redemption, through the daughter who had inherited his determination, if not his mistakes. And somewhere ahead, hidden in a cabin beside a mountain lake, lay the final piece of the puzzle that had cost 17 scientists their lives, a brilliant woman, her future, and a little girl, her mother. The true test of their unlikely alliance was just beginning. The pre-dawn sky hung heavy with fog as Michael guided the weathered Land Rover along the winding mountain road. Beside him, Catherine studied a paper map by the dim glow of a red-filtered flashlight, careful not to create a visible light signature that could be spotted from a distance. In the back seat, Sophie slept peacefully bundled in a thick wool blanket against the early morning chill, her small hands still clutching the worn leather notebook that contained her mother's legacy. "Turn left at the next fork," Catherine instructed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The road will look like it dead ends at a rock face, but there's a concealed access point my father designed. It reads the vehicle's undercarriage for a magnetic signature." Michael nodded, his eyes never leaving the treacherous mountain road. They had been driving for nearly 6 hours, having departed Chen's tea house well before dawn, with supplies, weapons, and Chen's solemn promise to misdirect anyone who came looking for them. So far, they had encountered no pursuit, no surveillance drones, no indication that the demiurge had anticipated their destination. "You're sure this property won't be connected to you?" Michael asked, not for the first time. The soldier in him demanded constant reassessment of their security. "Positive," Catherine confirmed. "It's registered to a shell corporation that on paper belongs to a Malaysian investment group with no ties to Wells Technologies. My father was paranoid about maintaining this place as his personal sanctuary." The Land Rover rounded a bend, revealing the apparent dead end Catherine had described, a sheer rock face blocking the narrow dirt road. Michael slowed the vehicle, his right hand instinctively moving toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. "Trust me," Catherine said quietly, noticing the movement. "Just drive toward it slowly." Michael complied, though every instinct, honed through years of covert operations, screamed against driving directly toward a solid barrier. As they approached, the rock face shimmered slightly, then seemed to part like a curtain, revealing a hidden tunnel, illuminated by soft amber lights embedded in the rough-hewn walls. "Holographic projection combined with specialized reflective panels," Catherine explained, a hint of pride in her voice. "My father collaborated with a Hollywood special effects designer who owed him a favor. The locals think this road just leads to an abandoned mining claim." The tunnel extended about 50 yards into the mountain before opening onto a breathtaking vista, a small, pristine valley nestled between towering peaks, centered around a crystal-clear lake that reflected the lightning sky like a mirror. On the far shore stood a structure that defied Michael's expectations of a cabin. Though built of rough-hewn logs and stone in keeping with mountain architecture, the building was substantial, 2 stories with wide windows facing the lake, a wraparound deck, and what appeared to be a separate guest house connected by a covered walkway. "Silver Creek," Catherine said softly, a note of unexpected emotion in her voice. "I haven't been here since I was 16. As the Land Rover descended the winding road toward the property, Michael assessed their tactical position with practiced efficiency. The cabin occupied high ground with clear sight lines in all directions. The single-access road made approach by vehicle obvious, while the surrounding forest would slow any attempt at covert approach on foot. The lake provided an open field of view that would make aerial surveillance obvious. Strategically, William Wells had chosen his sanctuary well. "How self-sufficient is this place?" Michael asked, automatically calculating their sustainability if forced to remain for an extended period. "Completely off-grid," Catherine replied. "Solar power with battery backup, geothermal heating, satellite communication that can be activated if needed but remains dormant otherwise, and a natural spring for water. The pantry should be stocked with non-perishables. My father had a service, maintain it quarterly." They reached the gravel drive that curved around to the cabin's main entrance. Michael parked the Land Rover under a covered carport that would shield it from aerial observation, then turned to check on Sophie. She was beginning to stir, her eyes fluttering open as the vehicle came to a stop. "Are we there, Daddy?" she asked sleepily, rubbing her eyes with small fists. "Yes, sweetheart," Michael confirmed, his voice softening as it always did when addressing his daughter. "We're at a special house in the mountains where we'll be safe for a while." Sophie sat up, peering out the window with curious eyes. "It looks like the silver forest from Ms. Catherine's story." Michael and Catherine exchanged a meaningful glance. The child's innocent observation confirmed they were in the right place, the setting of William's bedtime story about the mockingbird and the sparrow. "It is Sophie," Catherine said, turning to smile at the little girl. "This is where the mockingbird taught the sparrow all those special songs." Sophie's face brightened with excitement. "Can we look for them? The mockingbird and the sparrow?" "We certainly can." Michael promised a plan already forming. "But first, let's get settled inside. I need to check that everything is safe." With practiced efficiency, Michael unloaded their essential supplies while Catherine managed the cabin's security systems, an elaborate setup that required both a conventional access code and biometric verification. Sophie stayed close to her father, helping in the small ways an 8-year-old could, proudly carrying her own backpack, containing the few personal items Chen's wife had provided for her. The cabin's interior was both rustic and refined stone floors, covered with thick, hand-woven rugs, comfortable leather furniture, positioned to maximize the view of the lake, a massive river rock fireplace dominating one wall of the great room. The kitchen featured commercial-grade appliances and custom cabinetry, while built-in bookshelves throughout held an eclectic collection of volumes ranging from technical manuals to classic literature. "The pantry's well-stocked," Catherine reported, returning from her inspection of the kitchen. "And the generator has automatically maintained the refrigeration. We have everything we need for at least a month." Michael nodded, having completed his own security assessment of the property. 2 exits from every room, reinforced windows, line of sight to the access road from multiple vantage points. "Your father built this place like a fortress disguised as a vacation home. He called it his elegant paranoia," Catherine said with a faint smile, "building beautiful things that could also protect what he valued." The simple observation created another unexpected connection between them. Recognition that beneath Catherine's corporate exterior and Michael's scholarly facade, they shared a fundamental approach to the world: protect what matters, prepare for the worst, appreciate beauty where you find it. Sophie had wandered to the great room windows, her small hands pressed against the glass as she gazed at the lake, now shimmering gold with the morning sun. "Daddy, look! It's just like in the story, The Golden Lake." Michael joined his daughter at the window, momentarily struck by the peaceful beauty of their surroundings. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine an alternate reality where they had come to this place as guests rather than fugitives, where Elizabeth was still alive, where Sophie could simply be a child excited about mountain adventures instead of the unwitting key to a genetic weapon. The moment passed quickly, discipline reasserting itself as he turned back to Catherine. "We should start searching for whatever your father hid. The Demiurge has resources we can't match. It's only a matter of time before they track us here, no matter how careful we've been." Catherine nodded, already moving toward what appeared to be an office off the main living area. "If my father hid something here connected to Nightingale, it would be in his private study. He spent hours there during our visits, even on what were supposed to be vacations." The study was smaller than Michael had expected, intimate rather than imposing. A sturdy oak desk faced the single window, positioned so that whoever sat there could look out at the forest while working. Bookshelves lined the remaining walls, filled with volumes that reflected William's eclectic interests: medical texts alongside poetry collections, engineering manuals beside philosophical treatises. "Where do we start?" Michael asked, surveying the room's potential hiding places. Catherine moved to the desk with the confidence of someone following a familiar path. "The mockingbird taught the sparrow different songs," she murmured, running her fingers along the edge of the desktop. "In the story, they met on a special branch that hung over the Golden Lake." Her fingers found a small irregularity in the wood, a knot that, when pressed, released a hidden panel in the desktop. Beneath it lay a specialized fingerprint scanner, unlike any Michael had seen before. "Genetic verification," Catherine explained, recognizing his questioning look. "Not just fingerprint pattern, but actual DNA from skin cells. It was an experimental technology my father's company developed but never brought to market, too invasive for commercial applications." She placed her palm on the scanner, holding it steady as a soft blue light pulsed beneath her skin. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a gentle click, a section of bookshelf swung inward, revealing a hidden room beyond. "I never knew this was here," Catherine whispered, genuine surprise in her voice. "All those summers, all those times I saw him disappear into this study for hours, and I never knew." The hidden room was small, barely larger than a walk-in closet, but what it contained made Michael's breath catch. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, and maps, all connected by red string in the classic pattern of an intelligence analysis board. At the center, a single photograph drew their immediate attention. Elizabeth standing beside William Wells, both in lab coats, smiling with the enthusiasm of scientists on the brink of discovery. "When was this taken?" Michael asked, his voice tight with unexpected emotion at seeing his wife's face vibrant, healthy, alive with purpose. Catherine moved closer to the photo, examining the date printed in the corner. 12 years ago, about 3 months before the accident that killed the other scientists. Michael's eyes moved methodically across the evidence board, recognizing Elizabeth's handwriting on some of the documents, noting the military classification markings on others, tracking the connections William had mapped between seemingly unrelated events. It was the work of a man trying to solve a puzzle with global implications using fragments of classified information, exactly the kind of analysis Michael had conducted during his intelligence career. "Your father was building a case," he observed, professional admiration coloring his tone. "Gathering evidence against the demiurge, identifying key players, tracking their movements and connections." Catherine studied the board with growing comprehension, her analytical mind quickly processing the implications. He was preparing to expose them, she realized. Not just contain the damage they'd done with the Nightingale, but bring down the entire organization. At the bottom of the board, a sealed envelope was pinned with the simple label, "For Catherine when the Sparrow returns." Her hands trembled slightly as she removed it, the paper crackling beneath her fingers as she broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing what appeared to be a poem written in William's distinctive handwriting, along with a small key taped to the bottom of the page. Catherine read aloud, "Where silver meets gold, in morning's light, the mockingbird sang with all his might. 3 songs for danger, 3 for home. One final verse where waters foam, beneath the stone where first we sat, the truth lies waiting. Remember that. When Sparrow's daughter brings her song, the nightingale's power will be gone." Michael listened intently, his mind already working to decode the message. "It's a location cipher," he said. "Your father is telling us where to find the final component." "The stone where first we sat," Catherine repeated thoughtfully. "There's a large boulder on the lakeshore where my father used to read to me when I was little. We called it Storyteller's Stone." Sophie, who had been exploring the main room of the cabin, appeared in the doorway of the study. "Daddy, can we go see the lake now, please?" Michael exchanged a glance with Catherine, a silent communication passing between them. The key to solving William's cipher might well be at the lakeshore, and Sophie's innocent request could help them locate it without alarming her to the gravity of their purpose. "That's a wonderful idea," Michael agreed, extending his hand to his daughter. "Let's all go explore the Golden Lake together." The morning air was crisp and clean. As they made their way down to the lakeshore, Sophie skipping ahead with the boundless energy of childhood, momentarily free from the tension that had surrounded her for days. Michael watched her with a father's vigilant eye, one hand resting near his concealed weapon, his senses constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of threat. Catherine walked beside him, the small key from the envelope secured in her pocket. "The stone is on the eastern shore," she said quietly, "about 200 yards from the dock." Michael nodded, mentally calculating sight lines and potential vulnerabilities. "We'll make it look like we're just exploring with Sophie. If anyone is watching, it should appear as normal family activity." "Is that what we are now?" Catherine asked, a hint of something unidentifiable in her voice. "A normal family?" The question caught Michael off guard, forcing him to confront the reality of what had developed between them over the past days. From reluctant allies to partners in survival, their relationship had evolved into something he hadn't anticipated, a bond forged through shared danger and purpose, strengthened by mutual respect for each other's capabilities and commitment to Sophie's protection. "We're whatever we need to be to keep Sophie safe and stop the demiurge," he answered, carefully, unwilling to examine more complex possibilities in the midst of their current crisis. Catherine accepted his response with a slight nod, though something in her expression suggested she had been looking for a different answer. Before she could respond, Sophie called out excitedly from ahead, "Look, a big rock by the water. Is this where the mockingbird taught the sparrow?" They had reached Storyteller's Stone, a massive granite boulder that jutted from the shoreline, its flat top worn smooth by years of use as a natural sitting place. From its height, one could see the entire lake and the surrounding mountains reflected in the clear water. "This is exactly where the mockingbird taught the sparrow," Catherine confirmed, approaching the stone with what Michael recognized as carefully concealed emotion. "My father and I used to sit here for hours while he told me stories." Sophie climbed onto the boulder with childish agility, settling cross-legged on its smooth surface. "Tell me the mockingbird story again," she requested, patting the space beside her. "Please, Miss Catherine." Catherine joined Sophie on the stone, her corporate poise momentarily replaced by a gentler demeanor Michael hadn't seen before. As she began recounting the story of the mockingbird who taught the sparrow different songs to navigate life's dangers, Michael circled the boulder, examining its base with the methodical thoroughness of his military training. "Three songs for danger," Catherine was saying, her voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of a storyteller. "One for when storm clouds gathered and lightning threatened. One for when hawks circled overhead, hunting for smaller birds. And one for when strangers approached with nets and cages." Michael's attention caught on a small indentation at the base of the stone, partially hidden by moss and lichen. Carefully brushing aside the natural camouflage, he revealed what appeared to be a keyhole, ancient and rusted, as if it had been part of the stone for decades rather than something recently installed. "Three songs for home." Catherine continued watching Michael's discovery from the corner of her eye, while maintaining the story for Sophie's benefit. "One to find the way when lost in the deep forest. One to call for help when wings grew too tired to fly. And one to remember the path back to the Silver Forest and Golden Lake, no matter how far the sparrow had traveled." Michael caught Catherine's subtle nod toward her pocket, understanding immediately. As she continued the story, holding Sophie's rapt attention, he withdrew the key and carefully inserted it into the rusted keyhole. "But the most important song," Catherine said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that drew Sophie closer, "was the seventh song, the one where waters foam." The key turned with surprising ease, despite its aged appearance triggering a soft click from within the stone. A small compartment opened at the base, revealing a waterproof case secured with a combination lock. This song the mockingbird saved for last, teaching it only when the sparrow was ready. For this song had the power to heal broken wings, mend shattered nests, and protect all the birds of the forest from those who had harmed them. Michael carefully removed the case, nodding to Catherine that they had found what they sought. She smoothly concluded the story as he secured the case inside his jacket. "And did the sparrow learn all the songs?" Sophie asked, completely engaged in the tale. "She did," Catherine confirmed, brushing a strand of hair from Sophie's face with unexpected tenderness. "And then she taught them to her daughter and her daughter's daughter, so that all the sparrows would always know how to find their way home and protect themselves from danger." Sophie smiled, satisfied with the ending. "I like that story. It's like Daddy teaching me all the languages Mommy knew." The innocent observation struck both adults with its profound accuracy. Elizabeth had indeed embedded protection for her daughter in the languages she'd taught her, just as the mockingbird had taught the sparrow songs of survival. "Your mother was very wise," Catherine said softly. "She knew that understanding many languages helps us see the world in different ways, makes us stronger." Michael felt a tightness in his chest at the simple truth of Catherine's words. Elizabeth had believed passionately in the power of language to bridge differences, to preserve diversity, to create connection where barriers existed, everything the demiurge sought to eliminate through their vision of genetic purity. "Can we have breakfast now?" Sophie asked, her attention shifting with the practical focus of childhood. "I'm really hungry." "Absolutely," Michael agreed, grateful for the return to normal concerns. "Race you back to the cabin." Sophie's face lit up at the challenge. "I'll win," she declared, already scrambling down from the boulder and taking off along the shoreline path. As Michael and Catherine followed at a more measured pace, the waterproof case secure in Michael's jacket, he found himself watching the interaction between his daughter and this woman who had become so unexpectedly central to their lives. Catherine matched her stride to Sophie's shorter steps when the girl paused to wait for them, pointed out interesting plants and rock formations along the path, answered the stream of questions that Sophie, like all curious children, produced in endless supply. There was nothing artificial in Catherine's engagement with his daughter, no corporate executive playing a role or calculating an advantage. She responded to Sophie with genuine interest and surprising patience, qualities Michael wouldn't have attributed to her during their first tense encounters. By the time they reached the cabin, Sophie was chattering happily about wanting to swim in the lake later, having apparently decided that Catherine was now firmly established as part of their temporary family unit. Michael found himself both grateful for the sense of normalcy this gave his daughter and wary of the attachment forming between Sophie and a woman whose life existed in a completely different world from theirs, a world they would likely never be part of once this crisis was resolved. After a simple breakfast prepared from the cabin's well-stocked pantry, Michael established Sophie with books and drawing materials in a sunny corner of the great room, where he could keep her in sight while he and Catherine examined their discovery. The waterproof case now sat on the study desk between them. Its combination locked the final barrier to whatever William Wells had deemed important enough to hide within a stone by a mountain lake. "Any ideas on the combination?" Michael asked, studying the four-digit lock. Catherine considered the question thoughtfully. "My father never used obvious dates or numbers for his security measures. It would be something personal but obscure, something only I would know to try on." She thought for a moment, then carefully turned the dial 7529. 7 languages, 5 continents, 2 people, 9 years, she explained as the lock clicked when open. "It was a private joke between us. My father spoke 7 languages, had conducted business on 5 continents, trusted only 2 people completely, and took 9 years to build his first successful company." Inside the case lay a single USB drive, similar to the one Sophie had carried as a necklace, along with a handwritten note in William's distinctive script. "The full sequence requires all 3 components: Elizabeth's formula, Sophie's genetic key, and this targeting protocol. Together, they can either complete the weapon or destroy it forever. The choice belongs to those with the wisdom to see beyond power to possibility." Michael handled the drive with the reverence of someone who understood its true significance, not just as data storage, but as the culmination of 2 brilliant minds attempting to create safeguards against their own creation. Elizabeth and William had collaborated to build protection into the very weapon the Demiurge sought to control, embedding a self-destruct mechanism that required all 3 components to activate. "We need to access this," he said, glancing around the study. "Does this place have a secure system that can read the drive without connecting to any network?" Catherine moved to a painting on the wall, a landscape depicting the very lake visible through the cabin windows. When she slid it aside, it revealed a recessed computer terminal with no obvious connection ports. "My father's standalone system," she explained, pressing her palm against what appeared to be part of the wooden frame. The hidden panel responded to her touch, sliding open to reveal an advanced computer setup that looked more military than civilian in design. Its air gap never connected to any network, powered by its own dedicated solar cell. As Catherine activated the system, Michael found himself once again impressed by William Wells' foresight and preparation. The man had created layers of security and contingency planning that rivaled the most sophisticated intelligence operations Michael had participated in during his military career. "Your father was more than just a businessman with government contracts," Michael observed as the system hummed to life. "His security protocols, his planning, this level of operational thinking isn't standard corporate procedure." Catherine's expression remained carefully neutral as she inserted the USB drive into a specialized port. "My father had a varied career before founding Wells Industries. Most of it remains classified, though I've pieced together enough to know he worked for intelligence agencies in some capacity during the Cold War." The revelation added another layer to Michael's understanding of William Wells, not just a corporate executive who'd stumbled into military contracting, but a man with deep connections to the intelligence community, someone who understood exactly what he was doing when he initiated Project Nightingale. The computer completed its security protocols, displaying the contents of the USB drive, a complex series of file structures labeled with alphanumeric codes rather than descriptive names. Catherine navigated the system with practiced efficiency, selecting what appeared to be the main executable file. The screen filled with scrolling data genetic sequences, targeting protocols, delivery mechanisms, the complete architecture of a weapon designed to identify and eliminate specific genetic markers within a population. Michael, despite his linguistic rather than scientific background, recognized enough to understand the horrifying elegance of the design. This wasn't a crude bioweapon that would indiscriminately kill. This was a precision instrument for genetic selection on a global scale. "Elizabeth was right," he said quietly, the full implications settling on him like a physical weight. "This isn't just about targeted assassination or limited population control. This is engineered evolution, removing entire genetic lineages from humanity's future." Catherine's face had gone pale as she scrolled through the data. The targeting can be calibrated to any genetic marker, ethnic groups' inherited traits, predispositions to certain conditions or characteristics. Her voice held the hollow tone of someone confronting a nightmare made real. In the wrong hands, this could reshape humanity according to someone's ideal vision. The Demiurge's vision, Michael confirmed grimly. A world where genetic impurities are systematically eliminated, where diversity is replaced with designed homogeneity, where they decide which aspects of humanity deserve to continue. As they digested the enormity of what they faced, a soft ping from the computer announced the completion of the data analysis. A new window opened displaying a message addressed directly to Catherine. My daughter, if you are reading this, you have found all three components of Nightingale Elizabeth's formula, Sophie's genetic key, and my targeting protocols. Together they form both the weapon and its antidote. Elizabeth discovered that the Demiurge had corrupted our research, turning a medical breakthrough into a tool for genetic selection. When she came to me with her concerns, I was already experiencing cognitive decline, but I recognized the moral imperative to act. Together we built a fail-safe into the system, a self-destruct sequence that would render the weapon permanently inert. To activate this fail-safe requires a conscious choice and specific action. The attached file contains a genetic recoding sequence that, when combined with Sophie's unique genetic markers, will create a cascading rejection pattern in the weapon's delivery mechanism. In simple terms, it will immunize humanity against this particular threat forever. The choice now falls to you, Catherine. I have carried the burden of my involvement with Nightingale into death. I ask you to complete what Elizabeth and I began, not just to contain this weapon, but to ensure it can never be recreated. With love and faith in your judgment, your father. Below the message was a single command button, labeled simply, Activate Failsafe. Catherine stared at the screen, the weight of decision evident in her rigid posture. If we do this, she said slowly, we permanently neutralize the weapon's effectiveness. But we also destroy any possibility of using the original research for its intended medical purpose, treating genetic diseases. Michael understood the dilemma immediately. The failsafe wouldn't just disable the weaponized version, it would corrupt the fundamental methodology that made the genetic targeting possible at all, including its potential medical applications. Elizabeth believed the risk outweighed the potential benefit, he said quietly. She told me once that some knowledge comes at too high a price, that humanity wasn't ready for this level of genetic manipulation, even for healing purposes. And what do you believe, Michael? Catherine asked, turning to face him fully. As a father, as a sorrower, as someone who's seen both the best and worst of human capability, what would you choose? The question stripped away their roles as reluctant allies or tactical partners, asking instead for his deepest values, the core principles that had guided him through military service, academic achievement, marriage, fatherhood, and grief. Michael thought of Elizabeth, brilliant and principled to her last breath. He thought of Sophie, carrying in her genes both the key to a terrible weapon and its potential neutralization. He thought of the 17 scientists who had died to keep the secret of William Wells' efforts to create redemption from his mistakes, of Catherine's willingness to sacrifice her corporate empire to honor her father's final request. I believe, he said finally, that wisdom sometimes means closing doors we're not ready to walk through. That protection matters more than potential when the risks are this catastrophic. Catherine nodded, something like relief softening her expression. That's what my father came to believe too in the end. She turned back to the computer, her finger hovering over the command button. But we need one more component to activate the failsafe. Sophie, Michael said, understanding immediately. Her genetic pattern is the catalyst. Yes, the system needs a direct DNA sample to complete the recoding sequence. Catherine indicated a small sensor pad attached to the computer. A simple touch would be enough, the same technology as the desk scanner, but calibrated specifically for Sophie's genetic markers. Michael glanced toward the great room where Sophie sat peacefully drawing, unaware of the momentous decision being made about her genetic legacy. How do we do this without frightening her, without making her part of something no child should have to understand? Catherine considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. We tell her a version of the truth she can comprehend, that her mother left a special message that only she can open, like a fingerprint lock on a diary. The simple solution reflected an understanding of childhood that surprised Michael, a sensitivity to Sophie's perspective that seemed at odds with Catherine's corporate persona. Yet it aligned perfectly with the woman he had come to know over these past days, pragmatic but principled, strategic but compassionate. He nodded his agreement, and Catherine followed him to the great room where Sophie had created an impressive collection of drawings, mountains, lakes, birds, and three stick figures holding hands beside water that she had colored a bright gold. "That's us," Sophie explained when she noticed them looking at her artwork. "You and me and Miss Catherine at the Golden Lake. Do you like it?" "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Michael said, his throat tightening at the innocent depiction of their unlikely alliance as a family unit. "Miss Catherine and I need your help with something very special, something that has to do with your mother." Sophie's expression grew serious at the mention of Elizabeth. "About Mommy's special work." "Yes," Catherine confirmed, kneeling to Sophie's level in a gesture that seemed entirely natural despite her usual corporate formality. "Your mother left a message that only you can open, like a secret letter with a special lock that recognizes you." Sophie considered this with the solemn concentration children sometimes bring to adult matters. "Because of my fingerprints." "Something like that," Michael agreed, grateful for his daughter's quick understanding. "Would you help us open it? It would mean a lot to finish your mother's work the way she wanted." Sophie nodded, her small face reflecting a determination beyond her years. "Mommy always said finishing what you start is important." The three returned to the study where the computer still displayed the failsafe activation command. Catherine guided Sophie to the sensor pad, explaining that she should place her palm flat against it just like when they played with fingerprint toys at school. "It might tingle a little," Catherine warned gently, "but it won't hurt." Sophie placed her small hand on the sensor pad without hesitation, trusting completely in her father's presence and Catherine's guidance. The pad glowed with a soft blue light as it analyzed the genetic markers in Sophie's skin, cells confirming her identity as Elizabeth Chen Reed's daughter. On the screen, a progress bar appeared, filling rapidly as the system integrated Sophie's genetic data with the failsafe protocol. When it reached completion, a simple message appeared. "Failsafe activated. Nightingale neutralized." "Did it work?" Sophie asked, looking up at the adults with innocent curiosity. "Did we open Mommy's message?" Michael knelt beside his daughter, gathering her into a gentle embrace. "Yes, sweetheart. We finished your mother's work just like she wanted. She would be so proud of you." Sophie beamed at the praise, unaware of the true significance of what had just transpired, that her genetic inheritance had just rendered ineffective a weapon designed to reshape humanity, that her mother's scientific brilliance combined with her father's protective dedication had created a shield against a threat few would ever know existed. "Can we go swimming now?" she asked, her attention already shifting with the natural resilience of childhood. Michael laughed, the sound surprising him with its genuine relief. "Later today, I promise. First we need to—" The security alert interrupted him, a subtle chime that echoed through the cabin's sound system. Catherine moved immediately to the computer, pulling up the property's surveillance feed. "Vehicle approaching the access road," she reported, her voice shifting to the clipped efficiency of crisis management. "Two SUVs, military grade, no visible markings." Michael was already moving the soldier, replacing the father in one fluid transition. "How did they find us?" "Unknown, but we have approximately 10 minutes before they reach the property." Catherine activated additional security protocols with practice movements. "The cabin has defensive measures, but they're designed for deterrence, not sustained combat." Michael made rapid calculations, assessing their options with the cold efficiency his military training had instilled. "Is there another way out, a secondary escape route?" Catherine nodded, already moving toward the great room. "Boathouse on the far side of the lake. It connects to a maintenance tunnel that leads to a fire road on the other side of the ridge. There's an emergency vehicle there, old but reliable, stocked with supplies." "Sophie," Michael called, his voice calm but authoritative. "Remember our special game from before? We need to play it again. Quick and quiet, just like we practiced." To her credit, Sophie asked no questions, immediately setting aside her drawings and moving to her father's side. The fear in her eyes was tempered by trust, absolute confidence that her father would protect her just as he always had. "What about the fail-safe data?" Michael asked as they gathered only the most essential supplies. "We can't risk the demiurge recovering any part of it." Catherine was already addressing this, initiating what appeared to be a comprehensive deletion protocol on the computer system. My father built in a purge sequence that will wipe all data and physically destroy the storage devices. It's already running. The efficiency of their preparations spoke to how quickly they had become a functional unit, Michael handling tactical security and Sophie's welfare, Catherine managing technical systems and escape logistics. They moved around each other with the coordinated precision of a team that had worked together for years rather than days. Within minutes, they were making their way toward the boathouse along a narrow trail that hugged the lakeshore, hidden from the main property by thick stands of pine and fir. Sophie walked between them, one small hand in her father's calloused grip, the other holding Catherine's manicured fingers with equal confidence. The boathouse was a deceptively rustic structure that, like everything William Wells had created, concealed sophisticated technology beneath a traditional exterior. Catherine activated the entry mechanism, another biometric scanner disguised as an antique lock, revealing not just a boat slip, but a fully equipped escape station. "Your father really did think of everything," Michael observed as Catherine prepared the sleek motorboat while he secured Sophie in a child-sized life vest. "He used to say that paranoia was just good planning, given a bad name," Catherine replied, a hint of sad affection in her voice. "I always thought he was being dramatic. Now I understand he was being prophetic." The distant sound of vehicles approaching the main cabin spurred them to greater speed. Michael helped Sophie into the boat, then turned to assist Catherine, their hands clasping with the automatic trust of partners accustomed to relying on each other. As Catherine guided the boat away from the dock, Michael took position at the stern, rifle ready, scanning the shoreline for any sign of pursuit. The boat's electric motor made barely a whisper as it propelled them across the Golden Lake, heading toward the far shore where a narrow inlet concealed the entrance to the maintenance tunnel. They were halfway across when the first explosion shook the morning air, the cabin's purge protocol triggering a controlled destruction of the computer systems. Seconds later, gunfire erupted as the Demiurge operatives apparently encountered the property's automated defense measures. "Daddy," Sophie's voice trembled slightly as she pressed closer to Michael's side. "It's okay, sweetheart," he assured her, one arm protectively around her shoulders, while his eyes never stopped scanning for threats. "Just like the sparrow in the storm, remember. We stay calm and keep moving." "Three songs for danger," Sophie recited, drawing strength from the familiar story pattern. "Stormhawks and strangers with nets." "That's right," Catherine confirmed from her position at the helm. "And what did the sparrow do when danger came?" "She sang the songs the mockingbird taught her," Sophie answered, her voice steadying, "and then she flew to safety." "Exactly," Michael said, exchanging a glance with Catherine over Sophie's head, silent acknowledgement of the child's remarkable resilience and the unexpected family unit they had temporarily become. They reached the inlet without incident, the boat's narrow profile slipping between overhanging trees to a concealed dock built into the natural rock formation. Beyond it, just as Catherine had described, a maintenance tunnel led upward through the ridge, its entrance disguised as part of the stone outcropping. "The tunnel extends about a quarter-mile," Catherine explained as they secured the boat and gathered their supplies. "It will bring us out near the emergency vehicle. From there, we can reach the interstate without using any roads that connect to the main property." Michael took point rifle ready, while Catherine guided Sophie between them, their movements coordinated by now through practiced experience. The tunnel was narrow but well-maintained, lit by emergency LEDs that activated as they proceeded, guiding their path upward through the mountain. "Where will we go?" Catherine asked quietly as they neared the tunnel's end. "The Demiurge will have resources tracking us globally now that we've activated the failsafe. They'll know what we've done." The question acknowledged the reality they both understood but had not yet articulated, that neutralizing Nightingale wasn't the end of their struggle, merely the transformation of immediate crisis into long-term threat. The Demiurge would never stop pursuing them, never stop seeking to recover or recreate what they had just destroyed. "I have contacts," Michael replied, his mind already mapping potential safe havens. "People from my intelligence days who operate outside official channels. They can help us disappear, create new identities, establish a secure location off any monitoring grid." "Us," Catherine repeated, the single word carrying layers of meaning and question. Michael paused, turning to face her directly. "The Demiurge will target you now as much as us. You've chosen a side in a war most people don't even know exists. There's no going back to Wells Technologies, no returning to your former life. The brutal truth hung between them that Catherine had sacrificed her corporate empire, her wealth, her carefully constructed identity to honor her father's redemption and protect a child she barely knew. The enormity of that choice seemed to hit her fully only now as they fled through a hidden tunnel while mercenaries destroyed her family's mountain sanctuary. I know, she said simply, her voice steady despite the weight of her decision. I made my choice when I first saw those codes in your notebook. When I realized what my father had been part of, what he'd tried to undo before he died. She glanced at Sophie, who was examining the tunnel walls with curious interest, momentarily distracted from their danger. Some things matter more than empires. The simple declaration created a shift in Michael's perception of Catherine Wells, final confirmation that beneath the corporate armor and strategic calculation lay a woman of profound principle, someone who measured value not in market share or profit margins, but in human connection and moral choice. They reached the tunnel's exit, another concealed door that opened onto a small clearing where a rugged jeep sat beneath a camouflage covering. Beyond it, a narrow fire road wound through the forest toward the distant highway. Michael secured the perimeter while Catherine prepared the vehicle, Sophie helping by removing the camouflage cover with determined concentration. Their coordinated efficiency spoke to how quickly they had become a functional unit, three individuals from vastly different worlds united by common purpose and growing connection. As they loaded their supplies into the Jeep, a series of explosions echoed across the lake, the cabin's final defensive protocol engaging, designed to leave nothing salvageable for those who had breached its security. Catherine paused, looking back toward the plume of smoke now rising above the trees, her expression momentarily unguarded. Your father would be proud, Michael said quietly, recognizing the grief beneath her composed exterior. You completed what he started. You chose protection over power. Catherine met his gaze, vulnerability evident in her eyes before her professional mask slipped back into place. We should go. The fire will draw attention from local authorities, and we need to be well away before they arrive. Michael nodded, helping Sophie into the back seat before taking the driver's position. As Catherine settled beside him, he found himself hyper-aware of her presence, the subtle scent of jasmine that somehow persisted, despite days of crisis, the controlled precision of her movements, the intelligence evident in her assessment of their situation. The Jeep's engine roared to life, powerful and reliable despite its age. As Michael navigated the narrow fire road, Sophie's voice rose from the back seat, singing softly in what sounded like Russian, one of the languages Elizabeth had begun teaching her, one of the songs that carried her mother's legacy. Krabri vorobi letit domoy, she sang, the childish pronunciation nevertheless recognizable. The brave sparrow flies home. Michael caught Catherine's gaze, a moment of silent communication passing between them. Home was no longer a place for any of them, not Michael's modest apartment where he had raised Sophie after Elizabeth's death, not Catherine's penthouse overlooking San Francisco Bay, not the mountain cabin now burning behind them. Home had become something more fluid, more essential, the protective circle they had formed around Sophie, and the truth she carried in her genes, the alliance that had transformed from reluctant necessity to deliberate choice, the understanding that some battles required not just courage, but companionship. As the Jeep reached the main highway, blending into the anonymous flow of vacation traffic through the mountains, Michael allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. They had neutralized Nightingale, protected Sophie, and established a foundation for whatever came next. The Demiurge remained the threat, but they had struck a significant blow against the organization's plans, one that would force them to rebuild from scratch if they wished to pursue their vision of controlled human evolution. Where to? Catherine asked as they approached a highway junction, the practical question cutting through Michael's strategic assessment. North, he decided after brief consideration. I have a contact near the Canadian border. Former naval intelligence operates completely off-grid. He can help us establish new identities and transportation out of the country if necessary. Catherine nodded, already pulling a paper map from the glove compartment, maintaining their analog approach to evade digital tracking. As she calculated routes and alternatives, Michael was struck again by how seamlessly their skills complemented each other. His tactical experience with her strategic analysis, his protective instincts with her resource management, his languages with her technologies. In the back seat, Sophie had fallen asleep, the emotional exhaustion of their escape finally catching up with her young body. Michael adjusted the rearview mirror car to keep her in sight, this child who carried both Elizabeth's genetic legacy and her moral courage, the daughter he had sworn to protect above all else. She looks like her mother when she sleeps, Catherine observed softly following his gaze. That same determined expression even at rest. The simple observation, personal perceptive, offered without calculation, reflected how far they had traveled from their first encounter on the airplane, when Catherine had been merely a corporate CEO, intrigued by a multilingual professor, and Michael had been a wary father guarding dangerous secrets. Elizabeth would have liked you. Michael said, the words emerging before he could consider their implications. She valued people who made difficult choices for the right reasons. Catherine's expression softened the compliment, clearly meaning more to her than any corporate accolade. I wish I could have known her. So do I, Michael replied, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. So does Sophie. They drove in comfortable silence for several miles, the Jeep's powerful engine carrying them steadily northward through increasingly remote mountain landscapes. The late morning sun filtered through pine forests, casting dappled patterns across the highway, a peaceful scene that belied the danger still pursuing them. Michael, Catherine said, eventually breaking their companionable silence. What happens after this? After we establish new identities, after we find a safe haven. What then? The question addressed the future they had both deliberately avoided discussing, the long-term implications of their alliance, the practical realities of lives forever changed by the choices they had made. It wasn't just about survival now, but about what kind of life they would build from the ruins of their former existences. Michael considered his answer carefully, aware that his response would set parameters for whatever came next. Sophie needs stability, education, a chance at normal childhood experiences despite our circumstances. I need to honor my promise to Elizabeth, not just to protect Sophie, but to ensure she understands her mother's legacy. He paused, then added what he had only recently acknowledged to himself. And I need to finish what we've started with the Demiurge, not just running from them, but actively working to dismantle their organization, to expose their activities to agencies that can take official action. Catherine nodded, understanding immediately. From defensive to offensive, using what we know, what my father compiled, to build a case against them that can be presented to legitimate authorities. Exactly. But that kind of operation requires resources, connections, intelligence gathering capabilities. Michael glanced at her, acknowledging the elephant in the room. The kind of resources you no longer have access to since you walked away from Wells Technologies. A slow smile spread across Catherine's face, not her corporate mask or diplomatic politeness, but something genuine and slightly dangerous. Who says I walked away with nothing? My father taught me well. Michael. I've maintained contingency accounts, secure servers, and loyalist contacts for years, assets that exist completely separate from the corporate structure, accessible only to me. The revelation shouldn't have surprised him, yet somehow it did, another layer to Catherine Wells beyond the CEO persona she had initially presented. This woman had not only built an empire but had prepared for its potential loss, had maintained independence even at the height of her corporate power. So, she continued, her voice taking on the strategic focus he had come to recognize. While you have the intelligence background and operational experience, I have the resources and global connections. Together, we might actually stand a chance against an organization that has operated in the shadows for generations. Together, Michael repeated the word, carrying implications beyond their tactical alliance. Catherine held his gaze for a moment before looking back at the road ahead. Sophie needs both protection and purpose. You need both a secure environment for her and a platform from which to continue Elizabeth's work. I need... She hesitated, then continued with characteristic directness. I need to be part of something that matters more than quarterly profits or market share. The simple honesty of her statement created another shift in their relationship, acknowledgement that what had begun as necessity had evolved into choice, that their alliance was no longer just about surviving the current crisis, but about shaping a shared future. Before Michael could respond, a small voice came from the back seat. Are we going to live with Ms. Catherine now, Daddy? Sophie had awakened, catching the tail end of their conversation with a child's unerring instinct for significant moments. Her question cut through strategic considerations to the personal heart of their situation, Not just the practical arrangement of resources and skills, but the human configuration of their lives going forward. Michael met Catherine's eyes briefly before adjusting the mirror to see his daughter. "Would you like that, sweetheart?" Sophie nodded with the decisive certainty of childhood. "She knows the Mockingbird story, and she helped us finish Mommy's work, and she makes you smile sometimes when you think no one's looking." The simple observation delivered with a child's blunt honesty brought unexpected warmth to Michael's face. Catherine looked away, but not before he caught the hint of a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "We have a lot to figure out," Michael told Sophie, opting for honesty rather than false promises. "But Ms. Catherine will be part of our lives now. Yes, we're going to work together to keep you safe and to finish what your mother started." Sophie considered this with solemn concentration. Like a family. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and complication. Michael glanced at Catherine, finding her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Cautious hope, perhaps, or recognition of boundaries not yet ready to be crossed. "Like a team," Catherine answered before Michael could formulate a response. "A very special team with a very important mission." She turned in her seat to face Sophie directly. "And you, Miss Sophie Reed, are a crucial member of that team. Your languages, your bravery, your mother's legacy, all of it matters enormously." Sophie beamed at being acknowledged as a contributor rather than just a charge to be protected. "I can teach you some of my languages," she offered generously. "Daddy says I'm a very good teacher." "I would like that very much," Catherine replied with genuine warmth. "And perhaps I can teach you a few things too, about computers, about business strategy, about how to change the world by changing how people think." Michael listened to this exchange with complex emotions. Gratitude for Catherine's natural understanding of what Sophie needed. Caution about the developing bonds between them, and his own conflicted feelings about the woman who had transformed from potential threat to essential ally to something he wasn't yet ready to name. As they continued northward, the highway gradually emptying of traffic as they moved into more remote regions, Michael allowed himself to consider possibilities beyond immediate survival. A future where Sophie grew up with both her father's protection and Catherine's mentorship. A mission that honored Elizabeth's sacrifice while creating something new from what they had saved. A partnership that combined their complementary strengths against an adversary that had operated unchallenged for too long. The Jeep crested a mountain pass, revealing a panoramic vista of wilderness stretching toward the distant Canadian border. Somewhere ahead lay temporary safety, the chance to regroup to plan their next moves against the demiurge. Behind them, the burning cabin and neutralized research had struck the first meaningful blow against an organization that had believed itself untouchable. Sophie began singing again from the back seat, this time in what sounded like Italian, another of Elizabeth's languages, another thread connecting past to present to future. Catherine joined in softly after a few lines, her clear voice blending with Sophie's childish tones in surprising harmony. Michael didn't sing, had never mastered that particular skill, despite his linguistic abilities, but he listened, finding unexpected peace in this moment of connection amidst continuing danger. Whatever came next would be challenging, dangerous, uncertain. But for the first time since Elizabeth's death, he wasn't facing those challenges alone. The brave sparrow and the mockingbird had found their way to the silver forest and golden lake. Now they were charting a new course together, carrying with them the songs of protection, navigation, and resilience that would guide them through whatever storms lay ahead. As the Jeep descended toward a valley where a river glinted like silver in the midday sun, Michael caught Catherine's gaze once more, a moment of silent communication that acknowledged both how far they had come and how much remained unknown. She smiled slightly, the expression reaching her eyes in a way her corporate mask never had. "We'll figure it out," she said simply, the words addressing everything and nothing specific. "Yes," Michael agreed, surprising himself with his certainty. "I believe we will."